Hey guys, just want to say thanks for tuning in today. Smash that subscribe button if you're new here, and as always, please like this video if you enjoy the stories. Now, let's get into the stories.
The first thing that hit me was the hug. Not the normal, quick, awkward first date hug either, but the kind where someone presses in just a second too long, like they are checking something. Her arms were cold and tight, and when she leaned in close to my ear, she murmured that I was warmer than the last one and let out this small laugh that felt off, like she knew something I didn't. It stuck with me right away. I told myself it was just weird humor. First dates are weird. People try too hard. That's what I thought while my stomach did that slow sinking thing. We met outside this old bowling alley that had been shut down forever, but still had one diner attached to it. Neon sign half working, parking lot cracked, and empty except for a few cars. She picked it because she said she liked places that felt forgotten. I didn't think much of that at the time. I was more focused on the way she watched me instead of the building, like she was checking my face for reactions I didn't even know I was giving. Inside the diner, it smelled like grease and old coffee. The boots were ripped and patched with duct tape. I slid in across from her and noticed she didn't take off her jacket. It was one of those heavy coats that looked too warm for the weather. She kept her hands tucked into the sleeves. Her smile stayed fixed, like she practiced it. I tried to relax, tried to be normal, but every time I moved, she tracked it with her eyes. Not in a flirty way, more like counting. The waitress came over and I ordered fries and a soda. She ordered nothing, said she already ate. That should have been fine, but it felt like a lie that didn't need to be told. While we waited, she started asking me questions that weren't normal first date stuff. Not where I went to school or what music I liked, but things like how often I got sick, whether I ran hot or cold, if I ever fainted. I joked it off and answered halfway, but every answer made her nod like she was filling in blanks on a form. The fries came, and I noticed she was watching my hands instead of my face, watching me eat. When I reached for the ketchup bottle, she flinched just a little, then laughed it off before I could react. She apologized for being jumpy, said she hadn't slept well. I wanted to believe that. I really did. I kept thinking if I bailed now, I'd be the jerk telling my friends I ditched a girl for being awkward. After we ate, she suggested we take a walk. There was a bike path behind the alley that cut through some woods. I hesitated, but it was still early and I didn't want to seem paranoid. We stepped outside and the air felt heavier than before. The parking lot lights buzzed behind us as we walked toward the trail. She stayed close, almost brushing my arm with hers, like she was checking how close she could get without me pulling away. The path was narrow and covered in leaves. No one else was out there. She talked more now, but it wasn't about herself. It was about other people she'd known. She kept referring to them vaguely like past dates or friends, but never by name. She talked about how everyone had a different kind of warmth, how some people cooled down faster than others. I laughed nervously and asked what she meant. She shrugged and said bodies were strange like that. As we walked deeper, my phone buzzed with no signal. I didn't like that. I slowed down a bit, and she slowed too, matching me perfectly. I tried to change direction, suggesting we head back, but she acted like she didn't hear me at first. When she did respond, she said we were almost there. There wasn't a place, just darker trees ahead. That's when I noticed the smell. Not rot exactly, but something sour and metallic, like old pennies and damp fabric. I asked if she smelled it, and she smiled wider, like she was relieved and noticed. She said it was probably the creek nearby, except I didn't hear any water. We stepped off the main path onto a smaller one that looked more like a game trail. I stopped walking. My chest felt tight and my skin prickled. She turned to face me, and for the first time her smile dropped. Her face went flat, focused. She reached out and touched my wrist right over my pulse. Her fingers were freezing. She closed her eyes for a second, like she was listening. Something snapped in my head then. I pulled my hand back and took a step away. She didn't chase me. She looked disappointed. In a way, even. She said I was reacting earlier than the others. Not out loud in a way I could quote, but enough that I understood exactly what she meant. The words hit me like ice water. I backed up, almost tripping over a root, and she finally moved. Not fast, just steady. She told me to calm down, that it would only take a minute. Her hand went into her coat, and that's when I saw it. Not a weapon like a knife, but a small metal tool with a curved end and dried dark stains along the edge. It looked medical. It looked used. I ran. I didn't care how stupid it felt. I turned and bolted back toward the lights, branches whipping my face, heart slamming so hard it hurt. I heard her behind me at first, footsteps light and even. Then she stopped. I didn't stop running until I burst out of the trees and into the parking lot, gasping and dizzy. I ducked behind a car and crouched there, trying not to make noise. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. Still no signal. I waited, counting my breaths, expecting her to step out of the woods any second. She never did. After a while, I stood up and scanned the lot. Empty. Quiet. The diner lights were off now. Closed. I walked home instead of calling anyone. It took over an hour. Every sound made me jump. When I finally got to my place, I locked the door and sat on my bed in the dark. My wrist still felt cold where she touched it. The next day, I checked her profile. Gone. Unmatched. Like she never existed. A week later, I saw a missing person poster taped to a light pole near the bike path. Different name. Different face. But the smile was the same. Tight. Practiced. I don't go on dates anymore. Not like that. And sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, I swear I can still hear that little laugh, like I almost passed some test I didn't know I was taking. The night already felt wrong before I even met him. I remember standing in my room pulling on a jacket and having that tight feeling in my stomach like I forgot something important. Not keys or my phone, but something harder to explain. Like I was walking into a test I never studied for. I brushed it off because I do that with everything. First dates always make me nervous. I told myself that was all it was. He suggested a quiet bar on the edge of town. Not a chain place or anywhere trendy, just some low-lit spot he said barely anyone knew about. That should have been a red flag, but I liked the idea of not running into people I knew. When he picked me up, everything seemed normal enough. He was polite, calm, almost boring in a way that felt safe. He talked the whole drive, mostly about random stuff, like traffic patterns and how the weather messes with people's moods. I barely noticed when we turned off the main road and onto streets I didn't recognize. The bar sat between two empty buildings with boarded windows. The sign above it flickered like it was tired. I remember thinking it looked closed. He parked and got out like this was completely normal. I hesitated before following him, scanning the street. There were no other cars. No music leaking out. No laughter. Just that buzzing sign and the sound of my own steps. The moment we walked inside, everything changed. The room wasn't loud before we entered, but it wasn't silent either. There had been movement, talking, maybe even laughter. It all stopped at once. Not gradually, not awkwardly. It stopped like someone flipped a switch. Every head turned toward me. Not him. Me. It was the kind of stare you feel before you really register it. My skin prickled and my chest tightened. There were maybe a dozen people inside, spread out at tables and along the bar. None of them looked surprised. That was the worst part. No confusion, no curiosity. Just this flat attention, like they were checking something off a list. I slowed down without meaning to. He kept walking like nothing was wrong. I followed because I didn't know what else to do. My legs felt stiff, like they weren't fully listening to me. The bartender stopped wiping the counter and just watched. Someone in the back leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on my face. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. Maybe I spilled something on myself. Maybe I looked familiar to someone. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. But the longer it went on, the heavier it felt. No one smiled. No one went back to what they were doing. We sat at a small table near the wall. I could still feel eyes on me from every direction. My date finally looked at me then, like he noticed my mood shift. His expression didn't change. He just leaned back and relaxed, like this was exactly how he wanted the night to start. A server came over but didn't ask what we wanted. They just stood there looking at me, then glanced at him and nodded once. They walked away without writing anything down. That's when the fear really settled in my stomach. I hadn't said a word and neither had he, but something had already been decided. The drink showed up a minute later. One glass, set in front of me. Nothing for him. The liquid inside was clear and completely still. I didn't touch it. My hands were clenched in my lap. I could feel my pulse in my neck. The people around us had started moving again, but not like before. Their voices stayed low. Every few seconds someone would glance over at me like they couldn't help it. I leaned toward him and asked what was going on. He didn't answer right away. He watched the room instead, then finally looked at me with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. He told me to relax, that this place was just a little old-fashioned, that people like to look at newcomers, except I wasn't a newcomer, not to them. I noticed then how the walls were covered in framed photos. Not band posters or old ads, but portraits. People standing stiffly, all looking straight at the camera. Men and women of different ages, all dressed differently. Some photos looked recent. Others looked old, like decades old. Every single one had a small brass plate underneath. I leaned to read the nearest one. The name on it wasn't familiar, but the date underneath made my throat tighten. It was recent. Too recent. I looked closer at the faces. Something about them felt off. Not in an obvious way. Just this dullness in their eyes, like the light behind them had gone out right after the photo was taken. I realized then that the people in the bar looked like the photos. Not exact matches, but close enough to make my stomach turn. Similar bone structure. Similar expressions, like copies made from memory instead of real people. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, and every sound in the bar stopped again. All eyes snapped back to me. My date stayed seated. He didn't try to stop me. He just watched. I made it 2 steps before someone blocked my path. A tall guy with a blank face and emptied eyes. He didn't touch me. He just stood there. The bartender moved to the end of the counter. The server stood near the door. They weren't rushing. They weren't angry. They were patient. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. I turned back toward the table. My date finally stood then. He told me I was special. Not in a flattering way. In a way that made my skin crawl. He said they'd been waiting a long time for someone like me. Someone who fit. I asked fit what, but he didn't answer. He gestured toward the wall of photos. I noticed an empty frame between 2 of them. Clean glass. Fresh brass plate with no name yet. That's when I ran. I didn't think. I shoved past the guy blocking me. He reached for my arm, but missed. The door was closer than I expected. I burst out into the cold air and didn't stop until my lungs burned. I didn't look back. I ran all the way to the main road. I flagged down the first car I saw and begged the driver to let me in. I didn't explain. I don't think I could have. They dropped me off a few blocks from my place, and I walked the rest of the way, shaking and exhausted. The next day I tried to find the bar. I drove the same route, turned down the same streets. It wasn't there. The buildings on either side were gone too, replaced with a fenced-off lot full of weeds. No sign. No boarded windows. Nothing. His number didn't work. His profile disappeared, like he had never existed. I still think about that empty frame. About how calm everyone was. About how sure they seemed that I belonged there. I don't go to quiet bars anymore, and when people look at me a little too long, I don't wait to find out why. I almost didn't go on the date because my phone kept glitching that afternoon, freezing, restarting, buzzing with nothing on the screen. It felt dumb to let that stop me, but it added this low-level stress to the whole day, like the universe was tapping me on the shoulder and I was pretending not to notice. By the time I left my lid space, my phone finally settled down, which made me feel better for about 5 minutes. We met at a public park near the river, one of those places with walking paths, old trees, and benches that always felt slightly damp no matter the weather. She suggested it because she said loud places made her anxious. That sounded reasonable. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench with her hands folded, watching the path like she was waiting for a package instead of a person. She smiled when she saw me and stood up quickly, like she didn't want me seeing her sit too long. Everything about her looked normal. Hoodie, jeans, worn sneakers. Not trying too hard. That actually made me relax. We started walking right away, heading down the path that followed the river. There were a few other people around at first. Joggers, a couple with a dog, someone fishing. It felt safe enough. About 10 minutes in, she asked me if I could do her a favor. She glanced at my pocket when she asked, not my face. That should have been my clue. She said she'd feel better if I put my phone on airplane mode. Not silenced. Not face down. Airplane mode. I laughed at first because it sounded like a joke, like she was being dramatic about unplugging. But she didn't laugh back. She looked tense, eyes fixed on my pocket like the phone itself made her nervous. I asked why and she shrugged, said she didn't like interruptions, said it helped her feel present. I didn't want to argue over something small, so I pulled my phone out and switched it. the second the signal bars disappeared, her shoulders dropped. I didn't realize how stiff she'd been until that moment. She exhaled slow and deep, like she'd been holding her breath the whole time. That reaction stuck with me. We kept walking, but the vibe shifted. She seemed calmer now, more talkative. She started asking me about my routines. When I wake up, how long my commute is, who I talk to every day. It felt less like curiosity and more like mapping. Every answer I gave made her nod, like it fit into something she already knew. The path curved away from the river and into a wooded stretch. Fewer people here. The trees grew close together and blocked out a lot of sound. I checked behind us out of habit and noticed the joggers were gone. I tried to ignore that too. She told me she spent a lot of time offline. Said signals mess with things. When I asked what things, she didn't answer directly. Just said some places were better without noise. I joked that she sounded like a conspiracy page. She smiled, but it looked forced, like she was tolerating the joke. We reached a clearing with an old concrete structure half sunk into the ground. It looked like it might have been a utility building once, now covered in graffiti and vines. She headed straight for it like it was the destination all along. I slowed down, heart picking up speed. I asked what this place was. She said it was quiet. Inside, the air felt cooler. The concrete walls were thick, blocking out most of the outside noise. There were no lights, just daylight leaking in through cracks and a broken doorway on the other side. The floor was dusty, with footprints layered over each other like people came through here often but never stayed long. She leaned against the wall and watched me again, that same measuring look. She asked if I trusted her. Not in a cute way, in a way that felt like it mattered a lot. I hesitated too long. I could tell by the way her jaw tightened. She asked me to sit down. I didn't. My instincts were screaming now. My phone felt useless in my pocket. I had this sudden urge to turn airplane mode off, like it might save me just by existing. She noticed my hand twitch toward my pocket and shook her head slightly. Not angry, warning. She told me signals made it harder, that they slowed things down, that it was better when people were disconnected. She said it like a fact everyone should know, like I was the weird one for not understanding. I asked harder questions then, where she lived, who she was meeting after this. Why this place? She answered vaguely, circling around details without landing on any. I noticed something scratched into the wall behind her. Names. Dates, lots of them. Some crossed out, some circled. All messy, like they were carved in a hurry. I stepped back and bumped into something on the floor. I looked down and saw a backpack shoved into the corner. Old. Dirty. Unzipped. Inside was a phone. Dead. Cracked screen. Airplane mode symbol burned faintly into the display. My mouth went dry. She followed my gaze inside, like I'd noticed something earlier than planned. She said people always did that. Noticed too soon or too late. She said she wasn't supposed to rush. That rushing caused problems. She took a step toward me and I backed away. My heel caught on loose concrete and I stumbled. She didn't grab me. She just watched, head tilted like she was observing an animal behavior video. I reached for my phone and turned airplane mode off. Nothing happened. No signal. No buzzing. No relief. She flinched anyway. Her calm cracked for the first time. She told me not to do that. Her voice shook just a little, enough to scare me more. I ran. I bolted past her and out the far doorway, into thicker woods than before. Branches tore at my arms and face. I didn't care. I didn't stop until my lungs burned and my legs felt like rubber. When I finally slowed, I checked my phone again. Still no signal. I wandered until I found the main road. It felt like hours, but was probably less. Once I got signal back, my phone exploded with missed notifications. Texts, app alerts, even a weather warning I hadn't read. I didn't answer anything. I just kept walking until I got home. That night, I charged my phone and scrolled through our messages. Her profile picture was gone. Her account wouldn't load, like she'd never existed. I tried searching her name. Nothing. A few days later, I went back to the park in daylight. I found the path. The clearing. But the concrete structure was sealed off with fencing and warning signs. According to the sign, it had been closed for years due to safety concerns. No mention of graffiti. No mention of backpacks. Sometimes my phone still glitches, freezes, drops signal for no reason. Every time it happens, I think about how relieved she looked and how badly she wanted me disconnected. I knew the night was going to be weird before I'd even sat down. Not bad weird. Just that low buzzing kind of weird that sits in your head and makes everything feel slightly off-center. I remember standing outside the restaurant, checking my reflection in the dark glass, and thinking I looked like myself, but also someone pretending to be me. It sounds dramatic, but that was the best way I could describe it. Like I was about to hand something over without realizing it. The place he picked was one of those small family-owned spots tucked between bigger stores. Warm lights, faded menu board, the kind of restaurant people call cozy because it makes them feel safe. It smelled like bread and oil and something sweet I couldn't place. He was already inside when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, hands folded, watching the door. When his eyes landed on me, his face didn't light up like most people do. It sharpened, focused. We sat down and ordered food. Everything felt normal on the surface. He asked about my day, my job, basic stuff. But there was something about the way he listened that made my skin feel tight. He didn't nod or react much. He just absorbed, like a recorder left running. I noticed early on that he didn't eat much. He pushed his food around, cut it into small pieces, lined them up without realizing. Every now and then, he would glance at the table behind me, then back to my face like he was checking alignment. I tried to ignore it and kept talking, filling the silence because silence felt worse. Halfway through dinner, everything shifted. He leaned forward slightly, elbows off the table, eyes fixed on me in a way that felt heavier than before. He asked me to repeat my name slowly so he could lock it in. Not remember it. Not make sure he heard it right. Lock it in. The phrase landed wrong. It felt technical, deliberate. I laughed because laughing is what I do when I'm uncomfortable, and repeated my name. Slower than normal, stretching it out like he asked. As I said it, I felt ridiculous, like I was playing along with something I didn't understand. His reaction made my stomach drop. His eyes closed. Not for long, just long enough to be intentional. His lips moved slightly like he was counting syllables or matching the sound to something in his head. When he opened his eyes again, he smiled, but it wasn't for me. It was relief, like he finally solved a problem. After that, he started using my name a lot. Too much, at the start of sentences, at the end, sometimes twice in one breath. It didn't sound affectionate. It sounded like practice, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. I tried steering the conversation somewhere else. Movies, food, anything, but he kept pulling it back, asking where I grew up, how long I'd live in my current place, if anyone else had the same name as me in my family. When I asked why that mattered, he brushed it off and said names carried weight, said some were easier to hold on to than others. I started noticing the walls then. The restaurant had framed photos everywhere. Not food or landscapes, but portraits, staff members maybe, old owners, people smiling stiffly at the camera. Beneath each photo was a small plaque with a name, just a name. No dates, no titles. As my eyes moved along the wall, I realized something unsettling. The names were repeated, not exactly the same faces, but the same names, over and over. Sometimes spaced years apart based on how old the photo looked. Sometimes close together, like the name kept coming back in different bodies. I looked back at him and realized he was watching me watch the wall. His smile tightened. He said something about tradition, about honoring what came before. I nodded like that made sense, but my chest felt hollow. The food tasted wrong after that. Too salty. Too thick. I pushed my plate away. He finally took a bite of his meal then, chewing slowly, eyes never leaving my face. It felt like he was waiting for something to happen. The server came by to ask about dessert, and before I could respond, he answered for both of us. I didn't correct him. I didn't know why. My voice felt far away, like it might not come out right if I tried. While we waited, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook. Old, soft around the edges. He flipped through it absent-mindedly, pages filled with handwriting so tight it almost looked printed. Names, columns of them, some crossed out, some circled, some underlined multiple times. My name was already there, written neatly like it belonged. He noticed me looking and closed the notebook without any rush. He said he liked to keep track of things that mattered, said it helped him stay organized. I asked what happened to the crossed-out ones. He said sometimes things didn't stick. Dessert arrived. I didn't touch it. The sweetness made my stomach turn. He watched me push it away and frowned slightly like I'd missed a step. He asked if I wasn't feeling well. I nodded and said I was tired. That seemed to satisfy him enough to drop it. When the check came, he paid without looking at the total. The number didn't matter. What mattered was that he handled it like he'd done it many times before. Like this was routine. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. The parking lot was almost empty now. The streetlights hummed overhead. He walked me to my car and stood a little too close. Close enough that I could smell soap and something metallic underneath. He said my name again. Slow. Careful, like he was sealing something shut. I got into my car and locked the doors before I even started the engine. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit there for a minute before driving. In the rearview mirror, I saw him still standing there, watching, mouth moving silently like he was repeating something to himself. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his notebook, the wall of names, the way his face relaxed after I said mine. Sometime after midnight, my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown account. No message, just my name as a username, followed by a number. I blocked it. Then another appeared. Same thing. Different number. I turned my phone off and left it that way until morning. The next day, I looked up the restaurant. The website was bare. No menu. No staff list. Just a history page full of names. The same ones from the wall. Repeating. Looping. Mine wasn't there yet. I don't answer messages from people I don't know anymore. And I don't say my name out loud unless I absolutely have to. Sometimes I still feel like it's not fully mine. The first weird thing happened before I'd even met her, but I didn't clock it as weird until later. I woke up that morning with the feeling that the day had already happened. Not like déjà vu exactly. More like my brain was tired of something it hadn't done yet. I kept checking the time like I was late for something, even though I wasn't. I almost canceled the date twice for no real reason, just this heavy sense that I was walking towards something already decided. We met at a small late-night diner on the edge of town. Not the kind with neon and charm, just a square building with big windows and plastic booths. The kind of place that stays open because truckers need coffee and nobody asks questions. She picked it because she said it was predictable. Same menu, same lighting, same smell every time. That should have sounded comforting. It didn't. She was already sitting inside when I walked in, phone face down on the table, hands folded like she was waiting for instructions. She looked normal. Tired eyes, oversized jacket, hair pulled back like she didn't feel like dealing with it. I liked that. It made her feel real. We ordered food and made small talk. Nothing intense at first. The kind of surface-level stuff people say so they don't have to sit in silence. But I kept noticing how often she glanced at her phone without picking it up, like she was checking it in her head. Halfway through the meal, she leaned forward and asked me something that made my stomach drop, not because of what it was, but because of how casual she was about it. She asked if I ever texted myself notes so I wouldn't forget things. I told her I use reminders sometimes. She nodded like that fit. Then she picked up her phone and turned the screen toward me. It was a text thread. The contact name at the top was me. At first I laughed, because I assumed it was a joke, like she saved her own number weirder or something. But then I saw the messages. Not screenshots. Not notes. Actual texts. Time-stamped. Recent. They described our date. Not in a vague horoscope way, in detail. Things that had already happened and things that hadn't yet. The order we sat. What I ordered. How I tapped my foot when I got nervous. Even the way the booth seat stuck to my leg when I shifted. Stuff I hadn't noticed about myself until I read it there. My mouth went dry. I scrolled without touching the phone. Just leaned closer. The messages kept going. A prediction of me asking about her job. Me checking the door when someone walked in. Me thinking about leaving but not wanting to be rude. All of it was right. I asked her where she got those messages from. She shrugged and said they'd just started showing up a few weeks ago. Always from the same contact. Always stayed as me. She said she tried deleting the thread once and it came back. Same messages, same order. I asked if she was messing with me. She looked genuinely confused by that idea, like it hadn't occurred to her. She told me she thought I already knew, that I was calmer than the others. That word stuck. Others. She scrolled further down. The messages moved past the present moment. Described things that hadn't happened yet. Me reaching for my drink at the same time as her. The server dropping the fork. Me noticing the flickering light above the counter. Every line made my chest feel tighter. Then I saw one that hadn't happened yet but felt inevitable. It described me asking to see the phone again, which was exactly what I was about to do. I pulled back from the table. The diner felt louder suddenly. The hum of the fridge, the clink of dishes, the low murmur from the counter, all of it pressed in on me. I looked around to ground myself. Nobody else seemed to notice anything wrong. She watched me closely, like she was waiting to see if I'd followed the script. She told me she didn't think the messages were dangerous, just accurate. She said they helped her prepare, helped her feel less lost. I asked what happened at the end of the thread. She hesitated. That was the first crack I'd seen in her calm. She said it always stopped before the end. Like whoever was sending them didn't want to spoil everything. She said sometimes it stopped earlier than others. I didn't like the way she said others again. I asked how many dates she'd gone on since the messages started. She said 4. I asked where they were now. She said they stopped replying. Not right away, but gradually, like they were fading. I looked back at the phone. The last unread message sat at the bottom. She hadn't opened it yet. I knew that because the preview cut off halfway through a sentence. I told her not to open it. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Thin. She asked why. I didn't have a good answer. I just knew I didn't want to see what it said. She opened it anyway. Her face changed as she read. Not shocked. Not scared. Resigned. Like she'd been bracing for it. She didn't show me the screen this time. She just locked the phone and slid back toward herself. I asked what it said. She told me it described me leaving alone. That should have made me feel relieved. Instead, it made my skin crawl. Because the way she said it made it clear that leaving wasn't the end, just the next step. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but I didn't sit back down. I told her I needed to go. She nodded like that was expected, like it had already been accounted for. As I walked toward the door, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I stopped. Every instinct told me not to check it. I checked it anyway. New message, unknown number. The contact name at the top was my name. The message described me standing near the exit, hesitating, phone in hand. It mentioned the stain on the floor near my shoe, the way my heart was beating too fast. It said I would look back once before leaving. I did. She was watching me, phone in her hand, screen lit. I walked out without another glance and didn't stop until I was in my car. I locked the doors and sat there breathing hard, hands shaking. My phone buzzed again, then again. Every message came from me. It followed me home, described the streets it took, the song on the radio, the moment I realized I'd missed a turn and corrected it without thinking. When I got home, I turned my phone off and left it in the car. I went inside and sat on my bed in the dark. My living space felt unfamiliar, like I'd walked into the wrong version of it. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I turned my phone back on. Hundreds of messages, all from me, all describing things I hadn't done yet. I deleted them, all of them. The thread disappeared. An hour later, it came back. I don't know if she's still getting messages. I don't know if she ever did anything wrong. Sometimes I think she was just another person caught in it, trying to make sense of a future that wouldn't stay still. I still get texts sometimes from me. I don't open them anymore. But every now and then, something happens exactly the way it said it would. I didn't feel scared right away. That's the part that messes with me the most now. I felt off, sure, but not alarm bells off. More like when you walk into a room and forget why you're there, and it takes a second for the unease to catch up. I remember thinking the night felt staged, like the background of a game where everything looks normal until you notice the walls don't quite line up. We met at a mid-range restaurant near a strip mall, one of those places with booths packed tight and fake wood on the walls. Nothing fancy. Nothing sketchy. I picked it because it was public and busy, which usually helps me relax. He showed up early and waved me over with a big grin that felt a little too rehearsed, like he practiced it in a mirror. The first weird thing happened before we even sat down. He guided us to a booth, and instead of sliding in across from me like every other human on Earth, he moved in beside me. Same side. Shoulder almost touching. I froze for half a second, not sure if I misread the situation, but then he explained he liked to sit that way. Said it made him feel more in control of the room. Said he needed to block the exits. He didn't whisper it or laugh it off. He said it like it was practical, like he was explaining why you put on a seatbelt. I laughed because my brain needed time to catch up, then slid in anyway because the server was waiting and I didn't want to make a scene. That was mistake number one. The booth was narrower than I expected, vinyl sticking to my skin. His leg pressed against mine the whole time, not in a flirty way, just there, present. I tried to angle my body away, but there wasn't much space. Across from us, the aisle led straight to the front door. Behind us, a wall. I noticed he positioned himself so his body was angled outward, not toward me, like he was guarding something or watching for movement. We ordered food and he talked a lot at first, not about himself, but about places, layouts, how restaurants are designed to guide people without them noticing. He pointed out the mirrors near the ceiling and how they let staff see blind spots. He mentioned the emergency exit sign and how most people never actually look at where it leads. I nodded along, trying to seem interested, while my stomach slowly tightened. When the food came, he barely touched his. He kept scanning the room, eyes moving in a pattern that repeated. Front door, bar, kitchen, bathroom, hallway, back to front door. Again and again. Every time someone stood up, his body tensed slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for me to feel it through the booth. I asked him why he cared so much. He shrugged and said habits were hard to break, said he liked to be prepared, said bad things happened when people didn't plan ahead. I noticed then that his phone was face down on the table, screen dark, but his hand rested on it like he might grab it at any second. Mine was in my bag at my feet. Suddenly, that felt too far away. The longer we sat there, the more boxed in I felt. Cerberus passed behind us, brushing close. Every time they did, he leaned forward slightly, like he was shielding the space. Not protecting me, protecting the position. At some point, I realized he had shifted again. His arm was stretched across the back of the booth now, and resting near my shoulder. Not touching, just close enough to remind me it could. I tried to move my bag closer with my foot and accidentally bumped his shoe. He didn't react. Didn't even look down, just kept watching the exits. I started paying attention to the other people in the restaurant. A family 2 booths over. A couple arguing quietly near the window. A group of coworkers laughing too loud. Normal stuff, but once I noticed them, I noticed something else too. None of them ever walked behind our booth. They stopped short and went around, like the space behind us was blocked off in their heads. The server came back to check on us and hesitated when she saw how we were sitting. Her eyes flicked to me, then to him, then back to me. She asked if everything was okay. I nodded too fast. He answered before I could say anything else, voice calm, smile back in place. After she left, he leaned in closer. I could smell something sharp on his clothes, like metal and soap mixed together. He told me he preferred dates this way. Said it reduced variables. Said people were unpredictable when they felt they could leave. That sentence landed hard. My heart picked up speed. I tried to joke my way out, saying I needed the bathroom. He shifted slightly but didn't move enough to let me out. He asked if I could wait a minute. Said he needed to finish something. His eyes never left the front door. I felt trapped in a way I hadn't before. Not physically stuck, but mentally cornered, like any move I made would set something off. I watched his jaw tighten as someone entered the restaurant wearing a heavy jacket. He relaxed when the guy sat at the bar. I asked what he was watching for. He told me sometimes people came looking for him. Sometimes they didn't know they were looking. He said blocking exits helped him think. Helped him feel like he had control if things went bad. I didn't ask what bad meant. My food had gone cold, grease pooled on the plate, untouched. The longer I stayed, the more the noise of the restaurant faded into a dull hum. All I could hear was my own breathing and the soft tap of his fingers against his phone. Then something shifted again. The front door opened and stayed open longer than usual. Someone stood there, scanning the room. My date stiffened. His hand tightened on the phone. His body leaned forward, subtly blocking me in even more. That was the moment clarity hit. Not fear yet. Clarity. I wasn't here to be impressed or entertained. I was here because this spot, this seat, this time, fit into something else. Something already in motion. Before I could think too hard, I slid my bag up onto my lap and let it slip to the floor on the side of the booth. It was clumsy on purpose. When I leaned down to grab it, I twisted my body sideways and stood up in one motion, squeezing past him while he was caught off balance. He reached for my arm but missed, not by much. I didn't look back. I walked fast, not running, straight to the bathroom hallway. I ducked inside the first stall and locked the door, hands shaking so hard I had to press them against my thighs. I waited, listening. After a minute, I heard footsteps. Then they stopped, then moved away. I stayed there longer than necessary. When I finally came out, I scanned the restaurant. He was gone. The booth was empty. His plate untouched. His phone not there. It was like he had never been sitting beside me at all. I paid for my food at the counter, even though I hadn't eaten it. The cashier didn't say anything, just slid the receipt across. I noticed then that the front door had 2 exits, one on each side. He'd only been blocking one. Outside, the air felt unreal. Too open. Too wide. I stood there for a minute, just breathing, before walking to my car. I checked the back seat before getting in. Later that night, I replayed everything over and over. The way he sat. The way he watched. The way the space closed in around us. I realized something that made my stomach drop all over again. He hadn't been blocking the exits to keep people out. He had been blocking them to keep me in. I knew the date was off before anything actually went wrong. It wasn't a red flag moment. It was quieter than that. More like when you realize the air feels different in a room and you can't explain why. I remember tying my shoes and thinking the night felt already planned, like I was just filling in space someone else had measured ahead of time. We met at a small rented kitchen space downtown, one of those places people book for pop-up dinners or cooking classes. She said she hated restaurants because too many variables could mess things up. That phrasing stuck with me, but I ignored it. I liked the idea of something different. She said she cooked to relax. Said it helped her feel in control. The place looked normal enough. Stainless steel counters, shelves of spices, a long prep table in the middle. It smelled clean, almost too clean, like everything had been scrubbed down extra hard. She greeted me with a smile that felt practiced but warm enough to pass. She handed me a drink she said was just flavored water. I took a sip and nodded like it tasted fine. We started talking while she prepped ingredients. She moved with purpose, every step smooth and efficient. Nothing wasted. Nothing rushed. I noticed everything on the counter was already measured out into small bowls. Labeled. Neat handwriting. I joked that she was intense. She smiled again and said she liked things predictable. About 10 minutes in, while chopping something green and leafy, she asked if I had any allergies. She didn't look at me when she asked, just kept cutting. I told her no, not that I knew of. She nodded seriously like she was confirming a detail she'd already accounted for, and said it was good that it wouldn't complicate things. She didn't laugh, not even a little. I felt the chill crawl up my spine then, slow and deliberate. I told myself I was reading into it too much. People say weird stuff. Maybe she meant menu planning. Maybe she'd had bad dates before. I tried to let it go. But once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing things. The way she washed her hands again and again, even when they were already clean. The way she checked the stove knobs twice before turning one on. The way she kept glancing at a small notebook propped open against a spice rack. I couldn't see what was inside, but I saw my name written at the top of the page in bold letters. Below it, a list. She caught me looking and casually flipped the notebook closed, like it wasn't important. She said she liked to keep track of recipes. Said she forgot things otherwise. That didn't explain my name. I offered to help to make things less awkward. She handed me a task that didn't actually help. Stirring something that didn't need stirring. Keeping my hands busy while she did everything else. I noticed she watched closely the whole time. Not my face, my hands, how steady they were, how fast I moved. When we finally sat down to eat, the plates were already set. Identical portions. Identical arrangement. Even the utensils were placed exactly the same. She waited for me to take the first bite. I hesitated, then did. It tasted fine. Good even, rich and warm. She didn't eat right away, she watched. She asked questions while I chewed. Not normal getting to know you stuff. Questions about my health. How often I went to the doctor. If I ever had weird reactions to food. If I got sick easily. Every answer I gave made her nod and glance toward the closed notebook. Halfway through the meal, she finally took a bite herself. Small. Careful. She chewed slowly, eyes on me the whole time, like she was comparing reactions. I became painfully aware of every sensation in my body. My throat, my stomach, my heartbeat. Everything felt louder once I started paying attention. I asked her why she cared so much about allergies. She said she liked to know what she was working with. Said surprises made things messy. Said people didn't realize how fragile they were until something went wrong. The room felt warmer, or maybe I was imagining it. I took another sip of the drink and noticed it tasted different than before. More bitter. I set it down and pretended nothing was wrong. I excused myself to use the bathroom. She pointed down the hall and told me to take my time. That phrasing made my chest tighten. I locked the bathroom door and leaned against it, breathing hard. I checked myself in the mirror. I looked normal, a little pale, nothing dramatic. When I came back out, she had cleared my plate. Every trace of food gone. She was wiping the table with slow, careful motions, like she didn't want to miss a spot. I asked where my plate went. She said she didn't like clutter after things were done. Things were done. I grabbed my jacket and said I should head out. She didn't argue. That scared me more than if she had. She just nodded and said she understood. Said sometimes timing was off. Said she appreciated me being honest. As I moved toward the door, I noticed the notebook again. It was open now. I couldn't help myself. I glanced down. There were other names, lots of them, each with lists underneath. Some lists were long, some short. Some had a single word written next to the name. Uncomplicated. Resolved. Complete. Mine had check marks beside almost everything. My stomach dropped. I didn't run. I walked out like everything was normal. I didn't look back. Once I got outside, the air felt sharp and real, like I'd been underwater before and just surfaced. I walked 3 blocks before I realized my hands were shaking. That night, my stomach hurt. Nothing extreme. Just enough to keep me awake. I told myself it was stress or bad food. I didn't go to the doctor. I didn't want to explain. The next day, she messaged me to say she hoped I felt okay. Said sometimes first meetings were intense. Said she didn't regret it. That part stuck with me. I didn't reply. A week later, I walked past the same kitchen space out of curiosity. The windows were dark. A sign on the door said the space was no longer available. The phone number listed was scratched out. I searched her name online. Nothing. Her profile was gone, like it had never existed. But sometimes when I eat certain foods, I feel that same tight awareness crawl through me, like my body remembers something my brain doesn't want to. I still think about the way she nodded when I said I had no allergies. The relief in her face, like she'd been waiting to hear that. Like it mattered more than anything else. The thing that sticks with me the most isn't the fear. It's the waiting. I didn't realize that until later, but that night felt stretched, like time was leaning forward and refusing to fall. From the second I left my lit space, I had this sense that the date wasn't about me or him, but about something that hadn't arrived yet. We met at a small coffee shop that stayed open way later than it should have. The kind of place with dim lights, mismatched chairs, and a bell on the door that rang too loud every time someone came in. It wasn't crowded, but it wasn't empty either. A few people typing on laptops, a couple talking quietly in the corner, one person reading by the window. Normal. Safe. That's why I agreed to it. He was already there, sitting at a table with a clear view of the door. Not facing me when I walked in, but facing the entrance. When the bell rang, his head snapped up and he smiled. Not at me. At the door. Then his face shifted slightly, like disappointment, and he looked back down at his cup. I brushed it off. Maybe he thought I was late. I walked over and sat down. He smiled at me then, friendly enough, and apologized for zoning out. Said he got distracted easily. I nodded and ordered a drink. When I turned back, he was already watching the door again. Every time someone walked in, the same thing happened. Bell rang. His face lit up. A quiet murmur under his breath. Then a small shake of his head, shoulders relaxing again. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. But once I noticed it, I couldn't stop. I tried to pull his attention back to me. Asked about his job, his hobbies, basic first date stuff. He answered, but his responses were short and slightly delayed, like he was listening to 2 things at once. Every few seconds, his eyes flicked back to the door. I asked if he was waiting for someone. He smiled wider than before and said no, not exactly. Said he just liked knowing who was coming and going. Said it helped him stay grounded. Another person walked in. Bell rang. He smiled again, murmured again. Not yet. That time, I heard it clearly. My stomach tightened. I asked what he meant. He looked surprised, like he hadn't realized I could hear him. He laughed it off and said it was just a habit, said he talked to himself sometimes. I nodded, but my chest felt tight. Habits don't usually line up that perfectly. The coffee shop felt smaller the longer we sat there. The bell rang often enough that his pattern repeated again and again. Smile. Murmur. Relax. It started to feel like a countdown, like he was checking off boxes that only he could see. I noticed the staff watching him too, not openly, but in quick glances. The barista lingered near the counter longer than necessary. One of the workers wiped the same spot on a table 3 times while looking in our direction. Nobody said anything. I asked him what he was hoping for that night. His answer didn't make sense. He said he hoped things would line up. Said sometimes timing ruined everything. Said he hated when things happened too early or too late. He said it calmly, like he was talking about catching a bus. I tried to joke, saying this was starting to sound intense for a first date. He smiled at me, but his eyes stayed on the door. He said first dates were about observation, about seeing how people reacted when they didn't know what they were reacting to yet. That's when I noticed his hands. They were resting on the table, fingers interlaced, but his thumbs kept moving, rubbing together, faster every time the bell rang, slower when it wasn't. Someone new walked in, a tall person wearing a dark jacket. The bell rang louder than usual. His smile came instantly, wider this time. His murmur was more confident. Then his shoulders dropped. Not yet. I asked what would happen when it was yes. The word slipped out before I could stop it. He turned to look at me fully for the first time that night. His expression softened, almost sympathetic. He said I probably wouldn't notice, said most people didn't. That scared me more than anything else he'd done so far. I shifted in my chair and glanced around the shop. Everyone looked normal. The person reading by the window turned a page. The couple in the corner laughed quietly. The barista steamed milk. Life kept moving. Whatever he was waiting for wasn't obvious to anyone else. The bell rang again. This time it was someone wearing a hoodie I recognized. My stomach dropped. It was someone from my building. Not a friend, but familiar enough that I knew they lived near me. His reaction was immediate. Smile. Murmur, then a pause. His thumbs stopped moving. He leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on the door. For the first time, he didn't shake his head. Not yet didn't come. The person ordered a drink and moved to the side. His shoulders tensed. His smile twitched. Then the murmur came again. Not yet. This time it sounded annoyed. I stood up, not dramatically, just enough to push my chair back. The sound scraped too loud against the floor. A few people looked over. He didn't. He was still watching the door. I told him I needed some air. He nodded absently, like he already knew I'd say that. Said it was fine. Said I'd be back before it mattered. That sentence made my heart slam. I walked toward the bathroom hallway instead of the exit. I didn't know why. Instinct maybe. I ducked into the bathroom and locked the door, breathing hard. The room smelled like cleaner and burnt coffee. My reflection looked wrong. Not scary wrong. Tired wrong. Like I'd been holding my breath for too long. I stayed there until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally came out, the coffee shop felt different, quieter. The bell hadn't rung in a while. I scanned the room. He was still there, still smiling, but now he was standing. He stood near the door, angled just enough to see both inside and outside. His hands were clenched at his sides. The bell rang again as someone new walked in. He smiled so wide, it made my stomach twist. This time, he didn't murmur not yet. He took a step forward. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and walked straight out the back exit, the one near the bathrooms. I didn't know it existed until that moment. The door creaked as I pushed it open in cold air in my face. I didn't stop walking until I was 2 blocks away. I ducked into a convenience store and pretended to browse while my heart calmed down. Through the window, I watched the street. Nothing happened. No one followed me. Later that night, I checked my phone. I had a message from him. It said he was sorry I missed it. Said timing was everything. Said it almost worked. I blocked the number. The coffee shop closed a month later. A sign went up saying renovations were planned, but nothing ever happened. The place still sits there, lights off, chairs stacked, bell still hanging on the door. Sometimes, when I walk past other places late at night and hear a bell ring, I feel my chest tighten. I think about how many times he smiled, how patient he was, how sure he seemed that eventually it would be time. The night started with that fake calm that always shows up right before something goes sideways. I remember walking to the restaurant thinking this one might actually be normal. No weird gut feeling, no last minute urge to bail, just a quiet confidence that I was finally having a regular first date like a regular person. The place was a small sit down restaurant tucked behind a gas station, the kind people only find because someone else tells them about it. Warm lighting, booths with cracked leather, menus that felt sticky no matter how clean they looked. She picked it because she said it was consistent. Same staff, same recipes, same flow every night. I didn't ask what she meant by flow. I just nodded and followed her inside. We hadn't even sat down yet when she flagged the server and ordered dessert. Not after dinner. Not to share later. Immediately. The server hesitated like she misheard, then nodded and walked off. I laughed because it felt like a joke I was supposed to be in on. She didn't laugh back. She slid into the booth across from me and folded her hands on the table, looking relieved, like she just checked off the most important step. She explained it was tradition. Said dessert came first because this was where most guys stopped cooperating. That sentence stuck to my ribs and didn't let go. I asked what she meant, trying to keep it light, but she just shrugged and said people revealed themselves early if you gave them the chance. She said dessert showed commitment. Said if someone wouldn't stay through dessert, they wouldn't stay through anything important. The way she said important made my stomach tighten. The dessert came fast, too fast, like it had already been waiting. A thick slice of cake with sauce drizzled carefully around it. 2 forks placed side by side. She slid one toward me and watched until I picked it up. The first bite tasted fine. Rich, sweet, heavy. I made a comment about it being good. She nodded, eyes on my face, not the plate. She didn't take a bite herself right away. She waited, counting seconds in her head, maybe. I couldn't tell. Once I'd swallowed, she finally took a bite. Small, controlled. She chewed slowly, then smiled and relaxed back into the booth like we passed a checkpoint. After that, dinner felt backwards. The server came to take our real order, and she waved them off for a minute, saying we needed time. Time for what wasn't clear. She started asking questions then. Not fun ones, not flirty ones. Questions about my patience. How I handled discomfort. Whether I ever walked out on things that felt off. I joked again, because joking is easier than admitting you're uncomfortable. She smiled at the joke but didn't let it derail her. She said people who joke too much usually leave early. She said she appreciated that I stayed seated. I became very aware of the booth, how deep it was, how the table pressed into my stomach when I leaned forward, how her legs were crossed in a way that blocked the aisle just enough to make it awkward to get out without asking her to move. When the main food arrived, I wasn't that hungry anymore. The dessert sat half-eaten between us, melting slowly. She watched it like it mattered more than the rest of the meal. Every few minutes, she nudged the plate closer to me, encouraging another bite. I took a couple more just to avoid making it weird. She told me about her past dates then. Not specifics. Patterns. How most guys stalled at dessert. How some refused it outright. How a few ate it but got restless after. She said those were the hardest ones. The ones who tried to leave politely. I asked what happened to them. She said they always found a reason to stay a little longer. She said the restaurant helped with that. Said the layout encouraged lingering. Said the staff understood tradition. I glanced around after that, really looked. The other diners weren't doing much eating. Some had empty plates in front of them but hadn't asked for checks. Others had desserts untouched, just sitting there. A guy 2 booths down stared at his phone with the screen dark, thumb hovering like he forgot what he was doing. The server came back and refilled my water without asking. The glass felt heavier than before when I lifted it. I took a sip and felt uncomfortably full all of a sudden. Not sick, just weighted down. Like my body was moving a half-second slower than my thoughts. She noticed. Of course she did. She said dessert did that sometimes. Said sugar hit people differently. Said it helped slow things down so everyone stayed on the same page. I asked what page we were on. She smiled and said the middle. Said the middle was the most important part. Said endings were easy once you got there. I tried to shift in the booth and realized my legs felt heavy. Not numb, just sluggish. Standing up suddenly felt like a lot of effort. She watched me test the movement and nodded like she expected it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded receipt. Not ours. Older, worn soft from being handled too much. She slid it across the table. It had a date on it from months ago. Same restaurant. Same dessert listed at the top. Handwritten note at the bottom that said completed. I asked what that meant. She said it meant they stayed through dessert. The noise in the restaurant faded then. Not disappeared, just dulled, like someone turned the volume down a notch. I focused on my breathing, trying to clear my head. I realized I hadn't checked my phone in a while. When I reached for it, my fingers fumbled. Clumsy. She didn't stop me. She just watched. The screen lit up but felt too bright. No missed calls. No messages. Time had passed without me noticing how much. I told her I needed to leave. My voice sounded wrong. Thick. She tilted her head and said we weren't done yet. Said dessert wasn't finished. I looked at the plate. Only a few bites left. It felt ridiculous that something so small could matter so much. I pushed the plate away. That's when her smile dropped. Not anger. Disappointment. She said that was where most guys stopped cooperating. She said she really thought I'd make it through. She said it was harder now. The server appeared beside the table like they'd been waiting. They'd placed the check down without asking. The total didn't matter. What mattered was the word remaining written next to dessert. I stood up too fast. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. Nobody else reacted. Nobody looked surprised. I realized then that every table around us had dessert plates in the same position. Half-eaten. Melting. I forced myself upright and stepped into the aisle. My legs protested, but they moved. She didn't grab me. She didn't chase me. She just watched, eyes tired now like she'd done this too many times. I made it to the door and pushed it open. Cold air hit my face and snapped something back into place. I kept walking. Didn't look back. Didn't stop until I reached the main road. Later that night, my stomach felt off. Heavy, slow. I slept for hours and woke up still tired. The next day, I checked the restaurant online. It was listed as temporarily closed for private events. Her profile was gone. Messages deleted, like she never existed. Sometimes I think about that dessert, how it was already waiting, how everyone else stayed seated, how easy it would have been to just finish it and see what happened next. I don't order dessert anymore. Not first. Not last. Not at all. I thought I was doing everything right. That's what makes this one stick in my head. I told a friend where I was going. I shared my location. I picked a place I'd been to before. I remember tying my jacket and feeling almost proud of myself for being cautious without being paranoid. It felt like growth. Like I was finally figuring out how to exist without expecting the worst every time. We met at a late-night noodle place tucked under an overpass, the kind of spot that stays loud no matter the hour. Steam fogged the windows, music hummed from bad speakers, and the air smelled like broth and spice. It felt alive. Busy. Safe. That mattered to me. He was already there, sitting at a small table near the back to the wall, facing the room. When he saw me, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not in a creepy way at first. More like he was distracted by something behind me and forcing himself to focus. We ordered food and started talking. It was normal enough. Work complaints. Dumb internet stuff. The kind of conversation that fills space without asking much of you. Every now and then, though, he glanced at his phone and then at the door, like he was checking timing. About 20 minutes in, while we were waiting for our food, he asked if anyone knew I was on this date. Not casually. Not like small talk. He leaned forward when he asked, elbows on the table, eyes locked on my face. I told him yes. Said a friend knew where I was, said I always did that. His reaction was immediate. His smile dropped. Not all the way, but enough. His forehead creased like he was doing math in his head and didn't like the answer. He nodded slowly like he was disappointed but trying not to show it. That's when my chest tightened. He asked who knew. I kept my answer vague, said a friend. He asked how often I checked in with them. I joked that I wasn't on a leash. He didn't laugh. He nodded again, more tightly this time. Our food arrived, breaking the moment, but the vibe didn't reset. He barely touched his bowl. Noodles went untouched, steam curling up like it was trying to get his attention. He watched me eat instead, not in a hungry way, in a monitoring way. He told me he preferred dates where things stayed contained. Said outside awareness complicated stuff. Said too many people knowing details made situations unpredictable. I asked what situations he meant. He shrugged and said plans, said expectations, said endings. That word again. Endings. The restaurant noise felt louder suddenly. Forks clinking, chairs scraping, laughter from the counter. All of it pressed in on me. I took a sip of water and noticed my hand was shaking. I set the glass down carefully so he wouldn't notice. He asked if my friend was nearby. I said no. He nodded like that helped a little. Then he asked if I had shared my location live. I hesitated too long. His eyes narrowed just a bit. I said yes. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled through his nose. Not angry, annoyed, like a plan had just been delayed. He said he wished he'd known that earlier. Said he would have picked somewhere else. Somewhere else. I asked where he meant. He waved it off and said it didn't matter now. Said we could still enjoy the night, but his tone had shifted, sharper, clipped, like he was already moving on. I noticed then that the table next to us was empty, even though the place was packed. People kept glancing at it and choosing other seats. The chair across from me felt suddenly very far away. He asked what my friend thought of him. That caught me off guard. I said he didn't know anything about him. He frowned, said that was a shame, said first impressions mattered. He pulled his phone out then and placed it on the table face up. The screen showed a map app, a dot blinking slowly. My stomach dropped when I realized it was me, my location, moving in tiny increments as I shifted in my seat. He didn't comment on it, just let it sit there visible like a reminder. I asked why he had that open. He said he liked to know where things stood, said it helped him adjust expectations in real time. I pushed my bowl away, appetite gone. I told him I wasn't feeling great. He nodded, but his eyes flicked back to the map. The blinking dot hadn't stopped. He asked if my friend would check the location often. I said maybe, he sighed. Said that made things messy. Said people didn't understand how timing worked. Said interruptions ruined flow. I noticed his foot tapping under the table, fast and uneven. He glanced at the door again. A couple walked in, laughing. He watched them sit. His jaw tightened, then relaxed when they didn't look in our direction. I told him I was going to step outside for air. He stiffened, asked if I could wait, said we were almost done. I asked with what. He didn't answer directly, just said we were at the part where things usually settled. I stood up anyway. My legs felt steady, which surprised me. He didn't grab me. He didn't block me. He just watched, expression flat now like he'd already moved past this version of the night. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. It felt good, real. I checked my phone. 3 messages from my friend, all asking if I was okay. I replied immediately, told them I was fine but leaving. When I looked back through the window, he was still seated, staring at his phone. Not eating, not moving, just watching the screen. I walked a block away before calling a ride. I didn't want him seeing where I went next. I turned off location sharing as soon as I got in the car. My heart finally slowed once the restaurant disappeared behind us. Later that night, I got a message from him. He said he hoped I got home safe. Said next time, maybe we should keep things quieter. Said fewer people made it easier to focus. I didn't reply. The next day, my friend told me something that made my stomach drop all over again. They said while I was on the date, they got a notification saying my location sharing had been paused briefly, then turned back on. They thought it was a glitch. It wasn't. I checked my phone settings. There was a short gap in the timeline. Just a few minutes, right around the time he leaned back and sighed. I blocked him everywhere. His profile vanished like it had never been there. The noodle place closed a few weeks later for renovations. It hasn't reopened. I still share my location. I still tell people where I'm going. But now when someone asks who knows I'm on a date, I watch their face very closely when I answer. I didn't expect the comment to stick the way it did. At the time, it landed like a bad joke that missed, the kind you pretend not to notice because calling it out feels worse. But the second she laughed at my job and said it would be easy to explain, something in me stiffened. Not fear right away. More like the sense that I had just handed someone a label they were already planning to use. We met at a museum caf, One of those quiet spots tucked behind a gift shop where people sit with coffee and half pay attention to art books. I picked it because it felt neutral, public but calm, the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever happened. The tables were small and close together, and the walls were lined with framed prints that all looked slightly crooked. She was already there, sitting perfectly still, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. When I sat down, she smiled and looked me over like she was checking details. Shoes, jacket, posture. Not rude, just thorough. Things started normal enough. Small talk, comments about the space, the way the cafe smelled faintly like dust and sugar. Then she asked what I did for work. I told her, keeping it simple. Nothing exciting, just a job that paid rent and filled time. That's when she laughed. Not a big laugh, just a quick one, sharp and satisfied. She said that made sense, said that math would be easy to explain. I waited for the rest of the sentence. It didn't come. I asked what she meant, trying to sound casual. She waved it off and took a sip of her drink like it wasn't important. Said some jobs came with built-in stories. Said some people were harder to place than others. I tried to move on, but my chest felt tight. The way she said explain didn't sound like small talk. It sounded like paperwork. As we talked more, I noticed she kept circling back to details about my routine. What time I left work. How long my commute took. Whether anyone ever checked in on me during the day. I answered carefully, but every answer seemed to please her more. She nodded a lot, smiled to herself, like she was solving something quietly. The cafe started to feel smaller. The hum of the espresso machine felt too loud. People came and went, but she tracked them with her eyes like she was aware of every shift in the room. When someone sat at the table next to us, she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice even though she wasn't saying anything secret. She asked if I liked being predictable. I said I didn't think about it much. She said predictability made things smoother, said it made explanations cleaner. That word again. I asked her what she did for work. She paused before answering, like she hadn't expected the question. Then she gave a vague response that didn't really answer anything. Something about organizing records, keeping histories straight. It sounded official without saying much at all. I glanced around the cafe and noticed something odd. One of the framed prints on the wall had a small plaque beneath it, like it was part of an exhibit. The plaque had a name and a date. I leaned closer to read it. The name wasn't the artist. It was just a name. First and last. The date was recent. I looked at the other prints. More plaques. More names. Different styles of art, but the plaques followed the same format. Name. Date. Nothing else. I asked the barista what the plaques were for. She hesitated, then said they were part of a rotating feature. Said the artist liked honoring subjects. When I asked who the subjects were, she shrugged and said people from around here. That didn't make me feel better. When I sat back down, she was watching me closely. She asked if I liked the wall. I said it was interesting. She smiled and said it helped people remember. Said stories needed anchors. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out without thinking. No notification. Just a vibration. I frowned and put it face down on the table. She noticed immediately. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to my face. She asked if my job involved paperwork. I said sometimes. She nodded like that confirmed something. Said paperwork made people easier to trace, easier to summarize. She said it without any emotion, like she was talking about office supplies. The more she talked, the more I realized she wasn't really asking questions. She was testing phrasing, trying out ways to describe me. She repeated my answers back in different words, smoothing them down, making them simpler, like she was practicing an explanation out loud. I asked her who she needed to explain me to. The question slipped out before I could stop it. She smiled wider than before, said everyone eventually needed an explanation, said it was better when it was ready ahead of time. I stood up under the excuse of getting another drink. My legs felt steady, but my thoughts raced. At the counter, I watched her reflection in a glass case. She didn't look annoyed or confused that I stood. She looked patient. While waiting, I noticed a small bulletin board near the register. It was covered in flyers and notices. One caught my eye because it had the same format as the plaques. Name, date, short paragraph. The paragraph described a person in simple terms. Job, age, habits. Nothing dramatic, just a neat summary. I read another, and another. They all ended the same way. Explanation complete. My drink was ready. I took it and went back to the table. She asked if I felt okay. I said I needed to head out soon. She nodded, unsurprised. Said that tracked. Said people like me usually left around this point. I asked what happened after. She said after was easy. Said once something was explained properly, there was nothing left to manage. I looked at the wall again. One plaque stood out because it looked newer than the rest. The name on it was similar to mine. Not exact, but close enough to make my stomach drop. I told her I had to go. This time I didn't dress it up. I grabbed my jacket and stepped back. She didn't stop me. She just watched, eyes calm, like she had already adjusted the story. As I walked toward the exit, I felt my phone buzz again. This time it stayed buzzing until I pulled it out. New message. Unknown sender. It described me standing near the door. Described my job in one clean sentence. Described why I left early. I didn't open it fully. I turned my phone off and pushed through the door. Outside, the air felt sharp and real. I walked fast, putting distance between me and the cafe. I didn't slow down until I reached the next block. When I finally looked back, I saw her through the window, already talking to someone else at the table, laughing lightly, starting over. Later that night, I searched the museum website. The cafe page had a section about community features, rotating subjects, everyday lives captured briefly. It said the goal was to make people understandable. The next day, I went back during lunch to see if the plaque was still there. It was. The name, the date, and a small space beneath it, like it was waiting for an update. I don't go back to that area anymore. I keep my answers vague when people ask what I do. And every time someone says they get it too easily, I feel that same tightness in my chest. I should have noticed the timing sooner. That's what bugs me now. The whole night was built around time, and I walked straight into it without seeing the shape of it. I remember getting ready and feeling rushed for no reason, checking the clock over and over like I was already late, even though I wasn't. My body felt like it was trying to sync up with something ahead of me. We met at a 24-hour laundromat cafe combo on the edge of town. Yeah, that kind of place. Half of it was rows of humming machines. The other half was a tiny counter serving burnt coffee and greasy food to people who didn't want to go home yet. He picked it because he said he liked places where nobody stayed long. People came in cycles, washed, waited, left. That sounded harmless at the time. He was already there, sitting at a small table near the windows, back straight, phone face down, watch visible on his wrist. When I sat down, he smiled like he'd been waiting exactly as long as he meant to. Not bored, not impatient, satisfied. We talked about normal stuff at first, nothing deep. The machines rattled and clunked behind us, filling in the quiet. Every few minutes, someone walked past carrying baskets of clothes, eyes tired, minds elsewhere. It felt anonymous, safe. Then he asked what time I usually went to bed. Not in a caring way, not joking, just curious, like he was asking about my commute or favorite food. I told him, shrugging, saying it depended on the day. As soon as I finished answering, his eyes dropped to his watch. Just for a second. But it was deliberate, like checking a gauge. That was when my stomach tightened. He nodded like he confirmed something. Then he changed the subject completely. Asked about movies. Asked about the cafe. Asked if I liked staying up late. But every few minutes, his eyes flicked back to that watch. Subtle, practiced, always the same movement. I started noticing the rhythm. Machine clunk. Watch glance. Door open. Watch glance. Sip of coffee. Watch glance. It wasn't nervous. It was patient. I asked if he had somewhere to be later. He said no. Said he liked knowing where he was in the night. Said nights had stages. Said some things only worked in the right window. I left it off, but my chest felt tight. I checked my phone on the table, still early. Not even close to my usual bedtime. The fact that he cared made me uneasy. He asked how long it took me to fall asleep once I was in bed. I hesitated. He noticed, smiled slightly. Said he was just curious about routines. Said routines told you a lot about people. Behind him, a dryer buzzer went off, loud and sudden. I flinched. He didn't. He glanced at his watch instead. I started feeling tired out of nowhere. Not exhausted. Just heavy. Like the night was pressing down on me. I rubbed my eyes and blamed it on the lights. He noticed that too. Said nights had a way of speeding up when people weren't paying attention. I looked around the cafe and noticed something strange. The people who had been there when I arrived were gone, replaced by new ones. Then those left too. The room kept cycling, but he and I stayed still in the middle of it, like the eye of something slow and turning. He asked if I lived alone. I said yes. His fingers tapped once against his watch face. Just once. He asked if I slept with noise on or off. I said usually off. Tap. He asked if I ever slept through alarms. I joked that everyone did sometimes. Tap. Each question felt like another notch. I told myself I was overthinking, that he was just weird. Weird didn't mean dangerous. But my body didn't buy it. My shoulders stayed tight. My legs bounced under the table. I felt like I needed to move. I excused myself to use the bathroom. He nodded and checked his watch again as I stood up. Said nothing. Just watched. The bathroom was small and smelled like soap and damp fabric. I splashed water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. More tired than I should have been. Like it was later than it actually was. When I came back out, he was standing instead of sitting. Leaning against the table, watch sleeve pushed back. He said he thought I might be leaving. I said I wasn't sure yet. He smiled and said there was still time. Time for what? I didn't ask. We sat back down, but the vibe had shifted. He talked less now. Just nodded while I filled the space, rambling about nothing. Every pause felt loaded. Every glance at his watch felt louder. At some point, he said it was almost my usual time. Said nights like consistency. Said bodies followed patterns even when minds didn't. I checked my phone again. It wasn't, but it felt like it was. The lights in the cafe flickered once. Nobody else reacted. The machines kept humming. He smiled wider than before. He said people got sleepy around now. Said it was the best part of the night. Said things slowed down and made more sense. Said that was when decisions stuck. I pushed my chair back. Told him I was heading out. My voice sounded thick, like I'd just woken up instead of trying to leave. My legs felt heavy when I stood. He looked at his watch again. Frowned for the first time. Said I was early. That word sent a jolt through me. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the door. The bell above it jingled too loud. The cold air outside hit my face and cleared my head just enough for panic to spike. I didn't stop walking. I put distance between me and that place fast. Half a block away, my phone buzzed. A message from him. He said he hoped I got home okay. Said next time, maybe we could plan it better. Said timing mattered. I blocked the number and kept walking. That night, I tried to go to bed at my usual time. I couldn't. My body felt wired and exhausted at the same time. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his watch face, the way his finger tapped it, the way he frowned when I stood up. Around the time I would normally fall asleep, my phone buzzed again. Block number, but the notification still showed part of the message. It said something about being right on schedule. I turned the phone off. The next morning, I woke up later than usual. My alarm hadn't gone off. When I checked my phone, the alarm was gone completely. Deleted. No record of it ever being set. I checked my messages. Nothing new. His contact was gone like it never existed. A few days later, I passed that laundromat cafe in daylight. It looked smaller, sadder. A sign on the door said it would be closing earlier than usual due to staffing issues. The hours were crossed out and rewritten by hand. I don't tell people my sleep schedule anymore. I don't answer questions about routines, and every time I check the time now, I wonder if it's actually mine. The moment still replays in my body before it reaches my head. That tiny press. That pause. The way her face changed when my pulse betrayed me. I remember thinking it was just a sweet thing at first, a harmless test of closeness. A kind of moment people talk about later like it meant something cute, but my chest knew better before I did. My heart picked up speed like it recognized danger before my brain caught on. We met at a night market set up under an old highway overpass. Strings of lights hung low, food trucks lined up in uneven rows, and music echoed weirdly off the concrete. It felt lively and casual, the kind of place where nobody paid too much attention to anyone else. I like that. Noise feels safe. Crowds feel safe. I figured if anything felt off, I could just blend back into it. She was already there, leaning against a railing and watching people pass. Not scanning like she was bored, but studying. When she saw me, she smiled and waved like she was relieved, like I was the last piece she needed. We walked side by side at first, talking about nothing important, food smells, bad parking, how the lights made everything look softer than it really was. The first strange thing was how often she touched my arm. Not grabbing, just brushing, checking. Every time she did, her eyes flicked down like she was watching for a reaction. I told myself she was just affectionate. So people are. It didn't have to mean anything. We stopped at a stall selling fried dough and she insisted on sharing. Tore pieces off with her hands instead of using the napkins. Her fingers were warm. Dry. When she handed me a piece, she held on a second longer than necessary, like she was gauging pressure. We found a spot near the edge of the market where the lights thinned out and the noise dropped. Cars roared overhead every few seconds, the sound vibrating through the concrete. She leaned against the railing again and asked if I wanted to walk somewhere quieter. I said sure, not thinking much of it. Quieter still felt public enough. We walked down a path that curved away from the stalls, following the line of the river that ran under the overpass. The lights faded to scattered bulbs nailed into posts. Fewer people out here, couples mostly. A few groups sitting on the rocks. That's when she asked to hold my hand. It didn't feel rushed. It felt planned, like she'd been waiting for the right moment. I said yes because saying no would have felt weird, and because part of me wanted to believe this was normal. Her hand slid into mine easily, fingers lacing without hesitation. Then her thumb pressed into the inside of my wrist. Not hard. Precise. Right over my pulse. I didn't pull away right away because it took my brain a second to register what she was doing. It felt intimate in a way that made my skin crawl. Not romantic. Clinical. Her thumb stayed there, adjusting slightly until she found the rhythm. My heart sped up before I could control it. She smiled. Not at me, at my wrist. The smile wasn't playful, it was satisfied, like she'd just confirmed a suspicion. Her thumb pressed a little firmer, then eased off, then pressed again, changing pressure and watching how my pulse responded. My breathing got shallow without me meaning to. Every instinct screamed at me to yank my hand away, but my body hesitated, caught between politeness and fear. She finally looked up at my face then. Her eyes were bright, focused. She asked if I got anxious easily. Not teasing. Genuinely curious. I lied and said no. She nodded like she expected that answer, thumb still counting beats. I pulled my hand back under the excuse of adjusting my jacket. She let go immediately, no resistance. That scared me more than if she'd held on. She tucked her hands into her sleeves and looked out at the water like nothing had happened. We kept walking, but the air felt heavier. Every sound felt closer. I became painfully aware of my heartbeat, like it was trying to escape my chest. She walked a half step behind me now, watching my shoulders, my breathing. She started talking about bodies then, how they told the truth before mouths did, how stress showed up in places people didn't think to hide. Wrists, necks, behind the knees. She said some people learn to listen. I asked where she learned that. She said practice, said repetition made patterns obvious. We passed under a darker stretch of the overpass where the lights had burned out. She slowed down. I slowed too without meaning to. The river smelled stronger here, damp and metallic. She asked if I trusted her. The question felt rehearsed. I changed direction slightly, angling back toward the lights. She noticed immediately. Her head tilted. She asked if I was uncomfortable. I said I was just tired. She nodded like that fit into a category. She asked to hold my hand again. I hesitated. She noticed. Her smile faded just a bit, replaced with something more intent. I told myself I was overreacting, that holding hands wasn't dangerous. I agreed. This time she didn't lace her fingers with mine. She took my hand flat, palm up, like she was about to read it. Her thumb went straight back to my pulse. She pressed and held. My heart slammed harder than before. I could feel it jumping against her thumb. She watched closely, eyes flicking between my wrist and my face. Her breathing slowed while mine sped up, like she was sensing to me on purpose. She smiled again, wider this time. She said something about how easy it was to get people there if you knew where to press. I didn't catch all of it because my ears were ringing. My hand felt trapped even though she wasn't squeezing. The pressure was just enough to remind me she was in control. I yanked my hand away then, no excuse this time. I stepped back, heart pounding so hard it hurt. She didn't chase the movement. She stayed still, watching me like I was interesting. She apologized with her face, not her words. Said she forgot herself sometimes. Said she liked understanding how people worked. She took a step closer and I took one back. The path felt suddenly too narrow, the lights too far away. I scanned around for other people. There were some, but they felt distant, wrapped in their own worlds. I told her I needed to head back. She nodded calmly. Too calmly. She said that made sense. Said some people needed time after that part. What part? She turned and started walking with me, matching my pace perfectly. Every time I sped up, she sped up. Every time I slowed, she slowed. She didn't touch me again, but her presence felt closer than before. She asked what my resting heart rate usually was. I didn't answer. She said it didn't matter, she could estimate. Said adrenaline skewed things anyway. We reached the edge of the market where the lights brightened and noise rushed back in. I felt relief flood through me. She stopped just short of the stalls, like there was an invisible line she didn't want to cross. She said she had learned something important tonight. Said my body reacted honestly. Said that was rare. I didn't reply. I turned and walked into the crowd, letting people close the space between us. I didn't look back until I was several stalls deep. When I did, she was gone. I left the market and walked home instead of calling a ride. I needed to move. My wrist still felt warm where she pressed it, like her thumb had left an imprint deeper than skin. When I got to my live place, I locked the door and sat on the floor, back against it, waiting for my heart to slow down. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a notification from her. She said she hoped I got home safe. Said she enjoyed meeting me. Said next time, she would be gentler. There was no next time. I blocked her and deleted everything. But sometimes when I'm standing still and someone brushes past me, I feel my pulse spike out of nowhere, like my body remembers her thumb better than my mind wants to. The first sign something was wrong was when he asked about my purse. It was earlier, quieter, the kind of thing you only recognize later when you replay everything in your head like security footage. It was the way he noticed things too fast. Not just me, but space, angles, where stuff sat, where it stayed. We met at a low-key wine bar tucked into the ground floor of an old apartment building. Brick walls, dim lights, little tables barely big enough for two glasses. It was the kind of place people liked because it felt hidden without being sketchy. I picked it because it made me feel calm, like nothing bad could happen there. He was already inside when I arrived, sitting at a table near the wall. When he stood to greet me, his eyes flicked past my face for half a second, like he was clocking where I came from. Door, bar, bathroom hallway, then back to me with a smile that felt a little delayed. I sat down and put my purse on the empty chair beside me. That's where it always goes. Habit, I didn't think about it. Conversation started normal enough. Work, random complaints, stories that went nowhere. But I noticed how often his gaze drifted to my purse. Not in a nosy way. More like he was mentally noting its position, checking that it hadn't moved. Every time I shifted in my seat, his eyes flicked there and back. I told myself he was nervous. First dates make people weird. He ordered for himself quickly, like he'd already decided before he got there. When the server came back, he asked where the bathroom was even though it was clearly marked. He nodded when she pointed it out, like he needed confirmation. Before he stood up, his eyes went to my purse again. That should have been when I moved it on purpose, but I didn't notice. Not consciously. While he was gone, I shifted my chair to get more comfortable. The leg scraped a little. My purse slid when I did, bumping against my knee. Without thinking, I picked it up and set it on the floor between my feet. Closer. Safer. Automatic. I took a sip of my drink and checked my phone. No messages. Nothing urgent. The room hummed quietly around me. Other couples talking low. Glasses clinking. Soft music. I felt fine. Then he came back. He didn't sit right away. He stopped next to the table and stared at the chair where my purse had been. His face didn't change much, but something behind his eyes did, like a calculation breaking. He looked down at the floor, then back at me. He asked why I had moved my purse. Not joking, not curious. Tight. My stomach dropped. I laughed a little and said I just wanted it closer. Even as I said it, I knew that wasn't enough. The air around us felt thinner, like the room had leaned in. He sat down slowly, eyes never leaving my face. He asked when I moved it, while he was gone or before. I told him it was nothing. Just habit. His jaw tightened like he didn't believe me. He glanced around the bar, then back at the chair, then at my feet, then at my purse again. His fingers tapped once against the table, just once. Conversation didn't recover after that. He kept asking small questions that felt too pointed. Did I usually keep my bag that close? Did I always notice when people left the table? Did I get anxious when my things were out of reach? Every question felt like it was circling the same thing from a different angle. I told him I liked keeping track of my stuff. He nodded like that was a problem he hadn't anticipated. He said something about routines being important, said people revealed themselves in moments they didn't think mattered, said it was interesting what instincts kicked in when no one was watching. I asked what he meant. He smiled, but it was thinner now, said nothing important, said he just liked observing. I tried to relax, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I became hyper-aware of my purse, the zipper, the weight of it against my leg, the fact that he knew exactly where it was before and after. The server came back and asked if we wanted another round. I almost said yes just to keep things normal, but I caught the way his eyes flicked to my purse again when she stepped away, like he was checking whether she had noticed it too. He leaned forward slightly and asked if I trusted him. The question came out of nowhere. I hesitated and he noticed. His lips pressed together like he'd expected that pause. He said trust made things easier, said people complicated situations when they guarded too much, said if I hadn't moved my purse, the night would have gone smoother. That sentence landed wrong, heavy. I asked what would have been smoother. He shrugged and said logistics, said first impressions mattered, said he liked knowing where things stood. I told him I needed to head out soon. His eyes darted to the door, then back to me. He nodded, but his shoulders tensed. He asked if something was wrong. I said I was just tired. He didn't buy it. He asked if I always did that. Tightened up when people left the table. I said no. He smiled like he caught me in a lie. He said he'd only been gone a few minutes. Said nothing had changed except one thing. He said people didn't usually move belongings unless they felt threatened. Threatened. My heart picked up speed. I told him I was overthinking. He shook his head slowly. Said bodies didn't lie even when mouths did. I stood up then. Not abruptly. Just enough to put distance between us. I reached for my purse and slid the strap over my shoulder. The weight of it felt grounding. He stood too fast. His chair scraped loud against the floor. A couple at the next table glanced over. He noticed and forced his expression back into something neutral. He asked if we could talk outside, said it was quieter, said he didn't want to end things weird. I said no. The word surprised me with how easy it came out. He stared at me for a second like he hadn't expected resistance. Then he smiled again, but it didn't touch his eyes. He said that was fine, said he understood. I walked toward the door, heart pounding, aware of every step. I didn't look back until I was outside on the sidewalk. Cold air hit my face and snapped me fully awake. Through the window, I saw him still standing by the table, staring at the chair where my purse had been. He didn't sit back down. He didn't follow me. He just watched that empty space like it mattered. I walked fast. Didn't stop until I reached the next block. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip my purse strap to steady them. Later that night, I checked my bag out of pure nerves. Everything was there. Wallet, keys, phone. Nothing missing. Nothing extra. Except one thing. A small paper receipt folded neatly in the inner pocket. Not mine. Time-stamped for a drink he had ordered earlier that night. The ink was smudged in one spot, like it had been handled too much. Written on the back was a single sentence. Next time, don't move it. I threw the purse away the next morning, the whole thing. Replaced it with a new one. Different shape. Different habit. I blocked his number. Deleted the messages. His profile vanished like all the others. But sometimes when I sit down somewhere public and set my bag beside me, I feel that same tight awareness creep up my spine. And I keep it close. The warning came early, which is probably why I didn't take it seriously enough. It was said so casually that it slipped right past my defenses and settled somewhere deeper, where things don't always get questioned right away. I remember thinking it sounded like a joke that didn't quite land, the kind you only understand later when it's already too late to laugh. We met at a floating cave docked along the river, one of those converted barges with uneven floors and string lights nailed into wood beams. The water slapped softly against the sides, constant and distracting. I picked it because it felt open. Exits everywhere. Fresh air. Nothing boxed in. She liked it because she said movement helped keep things flowing. Her words, not mine. She was already there, sitting at a table near the edge, legs crossed, hands folded neatly like she'd been waiting a while. When I sat down, the dock shifted under our weight, and she smiled like she enjoyed that feeling, like she appreciated knowing when something moved. Things started out fine. Normal even. We talked about dumb stuff. Work annoyances. Bad movies. The way the river smelled different at night. She laughed at the right moments. Nodded when expected. Nothing screamed danger. If anything, she felt oddly prepared, like she rehearsed how to be easy to talk to. The first odd moment came when I shifted my chair to get more comfortable. The wood scraped loudly against the dock. She flinched. Not big, just a quick tightening of her shoulders. She glanced down at the floor, then back up at me, smile returning like it hadn't left. She told me the dock could be sensitive, said sudden movements made things messy. I laughed and apologized, thinking she meant spilled drinks or unstable footing. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on me a second longer than necessary. A server came by and took our order. She ordered something simple. I did the same. When the server left, she leaned forward and told me something she framed as advice. She said if I needed to leave at any point, I should just let her know calmly. Said leaving suddenly made things messy. That word again. I asked what she meant by messy. She waved it off and said misunderstandings, feelings, logistics. She said people underestimated how many small systems were in place during a night like this. I told myself she was just particular. So people are. As the night went on, I noticed how aware she was of timing, how long the server took, how often boats passed by, how the dock rocked differently depending on what direction people walked. Every change registered on her face like she was tracking variables in her head. She asked me if I ever left places without saying goodbye. I said sometimes. She frowned slightly and said that usually caused problems. Said people liked closure. Said things unraveled when someone disappeared mid-process. I asked what process she meant. She smiled and said first dates had stages. Arrival, settling, assessment, exit. She said skipping steps caused confusion. Our food arrived. The plates rattled slightly as the dock shifted again. She waited for me to start eating first. When I did, she relaxed like something had gone right. She ate slowly, carefully, never taking her eyes off the table for long. I noticed a small notebook beside her drink. Thin, worn. She kept one finger resting on it like she might open it at any second. I asked what it was. She said reminders. Said she liked keeping things orderly. I glanced past her at the river. The dark water reflected the lights in broken lines. It felt deeper than it should have. The cafe suddenly felt less open than before. The railings were higher than I remembered. The path back to shore narrower. Halfway through the meal, I shifted again, trying to stretch my leg. The dock creaked louder this time. Her head snapped up. She smiled quickly, but there was tension under it. She told me again not to leave suddenly. I told her I wasn't planning to. She nodded, satisfied, and tapped the notebook once. Conversation slowed after that. Not awkward silence, but something close. She asked fewer questions, watched more. Every time I glanced toward the exit ramp, she noticed. Her foot tapped softly against the dock, matching the rhythm of the water. I checked my phone. No messages. Time felt weird, like it was passing too fast and too slow at the same time. I realized I was tired in a way that didn't match the hour. My limbs felt heavy. I blamed the rocking. She asked if I felt dizzy. I said a little. She said that happened sometimes. Said bodies adjusted differently to movement. Said it passed if people stayed still. That didn't help. I pushed my chair back slightly, testing space. The dock shifted again. Harder this time. A glass clinked somewhere behind us. She inhaled sharply and placed her hand flat on the table like she was steadying something invisible. She told me this was what she meant. Messy. I asked what exactly would happen if I just left. Calmly. Normally. She didn't answer right away. She opened the notebook and glanced at the page inside. I saw diagrams. Arrows. Boxes. The word exit written and crossed out twice. She looked up and said people made mistakes when they rushed endings. Said sudden movement caused ripples. Said ripples attracted attention. The server came back to check on us, and she interrupted before I could speak. said everything was fine, said we were almost done. The server hesitated, eyes flicking to me, then nodded and walked away. Almost done with what? I stood up then, slowly, deliberately, trying to prove I wasn't rushing. The dock shifted violently under my feet. A couple nearby grabbed the railing. Someone cursed. Water slapped loud against the side. She stood too, face tight now, eyes sharp. She told me to sit back down. Said this was exactly what she warned me about. I didn't sit. I stepped toward the exit ramp, every movement careful. My heart was pounding. She followed, staying just close enough to make her presence felt. She said if I left like this, it would take longer to clean up. Said she preferred clean endings. I reached the ramp and felt solid ground under my feet. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. Behind me, the dock creaked again, louder than before. Voices rose. Confusion. Someone shouting for staff. I turned back once and saw her standing at the edge, notebook clutched to her chest, watching the chaos ripple outward. Her expression wasn't angry, it was tired, like she'd expected this outcome and hated the extra work. I didn't stay to see more. I walked fast, putting distance between me and the river. My legs shook once the ground stopped moving. Later that night, I checked my phone and saw a message from her. She said she hoped I got home safe. Said next time we should plan the exit better. Said she liked things tidy. I blocked her. The floating cafe closed a few weeks later after an incident. Something about structural instability. No one was hurt, according to the article. Just a lot of mess. I still think about that warning sometimes. How calm she was when she said it. How sure she seemed that leaving suddenly was the real danger. The weirdest part was how normal it felt at first. That's what still messes with me. If it had started creepy, I would have bailed early and laughed about it later. But it didn't. It started like any other low-effort first date where neither of you expects much and that somehow makes it easier to show up. I remember thinking this one would probably just fade into nothing, another name I'd forget in a week. We met near a public garden that wrapped around an old historic neighborhood. Brick paths, low lanterns, benches every few yards. He suggested a walk instead of sitting somewhere, said it helped conversation feel less forced. That sounded reasonable. I liked walking. Walking meant movement, space, options. The second we started, he took the lead. Not politely. Not like offering direction. He just stepped ahead of me, confident and fast, like there was never a question of who would set the pace. I didn't think much of it at first. Some people naturally walk faster. I sped up to match him. Every time I slowed down, even just a little, he noticed. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't grab me or snap. He just corrected it. A quick glance back, a small adjustment in his stride that clearly meant hurry up. Once, he even stepped to the side so I had to walk closer to him to keep up. It felt subtle enough that I wondered if I was imagining it. We talked while we walked, but it didn't feel like conversation. It felt like commentary layered over movement. He talked about roads, about how paths were designed to guide people without them realizing. He pointed out how the lights were spaced evenly so you never felt fully in the dark. How benches were placed to control where people stopped. I tried to slow down once to look at a sculpture near the path. He kept walking for 3 more steps before stopping abruptly and turning around. His expression didn't change. His eyes sharpened. He waited until I caught up, then resumed walking without acknowledging the pause. I laughed it off and made a joke about him being on a mission. He smiled, but it felt like a reward smile, not a shared one, like I passed something. As we moved deeper into the garden, fewer people were around. The paths narrowed and curved more. He stayed just far enough ahead that I had to focus on keeping pace instead of looking around. Every time I tried to drift slightly to the side, he adjusted the path to pull me back in line. I started noticing how often he checked behind us. Not nervously, strategically, like he was confirming distance. He never checked his phone, never slowed. His breathing stayed steady, controlled. I asked where we were heading. He said forward, said the route worked best if you didn't overthink it. That answer sat wrong in my chest. I intentionally slowed my steps a bit, pretending my shoe felt weird. Immediately he slowed too, but not enough to match me. Just enough to pressure me to speed back up. When I didn't, he stopped entirely, turned to face me. He said it was easier if we stayed in rhythm. Said breaks threw things off. Said stopping created gaps. Gaps for what? I didn't ask. I was too focused on the fact that my heart was beating harder than it should have been from just walking. We passed under a stretch of trees where the lights were dimmer. The sound changed there. Footsteps sounded louder. Closer. I tried to slow again, just a fraction, and he corrected me immediately by stepping closer, invading my space enough that I had no choice but to keep moving. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about walking. It was about control through motion. He asked if I trusted him to lead. The question came without warning, tossed back over his shoulder. I didn't answer right away. He slowed just enough to force an answer. I said something neutral. He nodded like that was acceptable, but not ideal. He started talking about momentum, about how people felt safer when someone else decided the pace. Said hesitation caused problems. Said hesitation made people visible. I glanced behind us. The path curved sharply now, blocking the view of the entrance. The garden suddenly felt bigger than it had before, like it stretched further than it should. I stopped. Not slowly, fully. He took 3 more steps before realizing. This time he didn't just turn around. He walked back toward me, closing the space fast. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes were sharp. He asked why I stopped. I told him I needed a break. He frowned, just slightly, like he was recalculating. He said breaks weren't part of the plan. Said we were almost through this section. Through to where? I took a step back. He took one forward. The path felt narrower than before. Bushes pressed in on both sides. I realized how quiet it was. No cars. No voices. Just our breathing and distant water from a fountain somewhere ahead. He told me I was falling behind. Said I needed to keep up. That phrase flipped something in me. I turned around and started walking back the way we came. Not running. Not panicked. Just decisive. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I moved. He reacted instantly. He stepped in front of me, blocking the path. Not aggressively. Deliberately. He said going backward wasn't efficient. Said the route wasn't designed for that. Said it would take longer. I stepped to the side. He mirrored me. His movements were smooth, practiced. He smiled like he was trying to calm me down, but it didn't reach his eyes. I told him I was done with the walk. His smile dropped. Not angry. Annoyed, like a process had been interrupted. He glanced past me, then back the path ahead. He said sudden changes made things complicated. Said if I just kept moving, this would be over soon. That word again. Over. I didn't argue. I ducked past him toward the bushes and pushed through. Branches scraped my arms. My foot slipped on dirt. I didn't care. I just needed space. I heard him behind me for a few seconds. Not running. Matching my pace. Correcting me even then by shifting direction to keep me from drifting toward the street. Then voices appeared ahead. A couple walking their dog. The sound broke the tension like glass shattering. I burst back onto the main path, heart pounding, breath ragged. I turned around. He was gone. No footsteps, no figure. Just the empty curve of the path and the lights humming softly above it. I walked straight to the nearest exit and didn't stop until I was back on a busy street. My legs shook once the danger passed. I leaned against a wall and tried to slow my breathing. Later that night, he messaged me saying he hoped I got home okay. Said next time I should trust the pace more. Said things went smoother when people didn't resist guidance. There was no next time. I blocked him and deleted everything. But even now, when someone walks just a little too far ahead of me and glances back like they're checking my speed, my chest tightens and my steps slow on purpose. I didn't think the question itself was strange at first. That's the part that gets me. It felt like one of those thoughtful checking questions people ask now, the kind that shows awareness. I remember feeling a tiny bit relieved when she brought it up, like maybe this date would be one of the rare ones where I didn't have to keep my guard up the whole time. We met at a converted warehouse space that had been split into little food stalls and seating areas. High ceilings, exposed pipes, strings of lights hanging low. It was loud in a comfortable way. Voices overlapping, music echoing, chairs scraping concrete. Lots of exits, lots of people. I picked it on purpose. She was already there, standing near a long communal table, scrolling on her phone. When she looked up and smiled, it seemed genuine, Easy. We grabbed food from different stalls and sat near the center, surrounded by strangers who were too busy with their own nights to care about ours. Things started out normal. Actually nice. She talked fast, laughed easily, complained about work in a way that made me laugh too. Nothing felt rehearsed. I remember thinking I might finally have a date story that didn't turn into a warning. Halfway through eating, she asked what I'd do if I ever felt unsafe on a date. The question landed softly. No edge to it, just curiosity. I answered honestly. I said I'd probably make an excuse, text a friend, leave. I said I trusted my instincts even if it felt awkward. I said I'd rather be rude than ignore a bad feeling. She laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a quick one. A real laugh, like I told a joke she hadn't expected but really enjoyed. She leaned back in her chair, smiling wide, eyes bright. Something in my chest tightened. She said that was cute. Said people always thought they knew what they do. Said plans sounded good until reality showed up. She waved her hand like the idea of leaving was theoretical, not practical. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound didn't come out right. I felt suddenly exposed. I just laid out a map of myself and watched her memorize it. After that, the questions changed. She asked how quickly I noticed when my mood shifted. Asked if I ever second-guessed my gut. Asked if I worried about overreacting. Each question felt casual on its own, but together they formed something heavier, like she was poking at the edges of my confidence. She told me she liked asking that question early, said it saved time. Said people who answered too carefully were usually harder to deal with. She said honest answers were easier to manage. Manage was the word that stuck. I noticed then how she was positioned in her chair, angled slightly toward me, but also toward the aisle, like she was aware of traffic patterns. Every time someone walked past, her eyes flicked up and tracked them until they were gone. I checked my phone under the table without meaning to. She noticed immediately, asked if I needed to check in with someone. The way she said it made it sound like a habit she'd observed before. I said no. She smiled like she'd won a small bet. The noise around us started to fade into the background, not because it got quieter, but because I was paying attention to the wrong things now. Her posture, her timing, the way she nodded at certain answers and lingered on others. She asked if I ever practiced what I'd say before leaving a bad situation. I said sometimes. She laughed again and softer this time. Said practice didn't always help when pressure was applied. Said people froze more often than they admitted. I told her I didn't think I would. She raised her eyebrows slightly, like she was amused by my confidence. She said most people thought that. I shifted in my chair and glanced around the space. It still looked safe, still felt busy. But something had changed. The exits didn't feel as close anymore. The crowd felt less solid, like it could thin out at any moment. She asked if I felt safe right now. The question made my throat tighten. I said yes, because saying no felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to face. She nodded, satisfied, and took a sip of her drink. She said it was interesting how people define safe. Said some thought it meant familiar. Some thought it meant crowded. Some thought it meant polite. She said all of those were unreliable. She leaned in slightly and said the laugh earlier wasn't meant to be mean. Said she just found it comforting when people were honest about their plans. Said it made outcomes easier to predict. I tried to change the subject, asking about her hobbies, her weekends, anything else. She answered, but briefly, like it didn't matter. Every answer looped back to behavior. How people moved through spaces. How they reacted under stress. How stories change when retold. She asked if I'd ever had to use my safety plan before. I said yes. She asked if it worked. I said I got home. She smiled and said getting home wasn't the same as being safe. Said sometimes people carry things with them longer than they realized. I felt cold then, even though the room was warm. I wrapped my hands around my cup and noticed they were shaking. She noticed too. She said my heart rate changed when she laughed earlier. Said she could tell by my breathing. Said bodies were honest even when words tried to smooth things over. I pushed my chair back slightly, testing space. She didn't move, but her eyes sharpened. She asked if I was thinking about leaving. I said I might need to soon. She sighed, like she was disappointed but not surprised. Said this was usually the point where people tried to implement their plan. Said it rarely went how they imagined. I asked what she meant by that. She gestured around us. Said look how loud it was, how busy, how easy it was to assume someone would notice if something went wrong. She said people counted on witnesses who weren't actually watching. I stood up. My legs felt steady, which surprised me. I grabbed my bag and slung it over my shoulder. I said I was heading out. She stayed seated, didn't reach for me, didn't raise her voice. She just watched, had tilted slightly like she was observing an outcome she'd already anticipated. She said leaving suddenly made memories blur. Said if I wanted a clean ending, I should sit back down and finish my drink. Said abrupt exits confuse people later. I didn't sit. I walked away from the table, weaving through chairs and people. My heart pounded, but each step felt clearer than the last. I didn't look back until I reached the edge of the space. She was still there, still seated, already looking down at her phone, like I'd never been there at all. Outside, the air felt sharp and grounding. I walked fast, putting distance between myself and the building. I pulled my phone out and texted a friend without overthinking it. Just said I was on my way home and would explain later. When I got to my live place, I locked the door and sat on the floor for a while, letting my body calm down. My hands stopped shaking eventually. My breathing slowed. Later that night, I got a message from her. She said she hoped I got home safe. Said she appreciated my honesty. Said next time, maybe I'd trust myself less and the situation more. There was no next time. I blocked her and deleted everything. But the last stuck with me. The way it wasn't cruel, just certain. Like she'd heard that answer many times before and already knew how it usually ended. Now, when someone asks me what I'd do if I felt unsafe, I still answer honestly. But I watch their reaction very carefully. Because sometimes the question isn't about concern. Sometimes it's about preparation. The apology came out of nowhere, and that's what made it stick. Not the words themselves, but the timing. 1 minute we were talking about nothing important, the kind of filler conversation you forget as soon as it ends, and the next minute he was looking at me like he'd just seen a ghost and felt bad about it. I remember thinking I must have missed something, like I'd spaced out and the night had jumped ahead without me. We met at a public pier that jutted out into the bay, the kind with food stands, coin-operated binoculars, and benches bolted to the wood. It was early evening, not dark yet, but the sun was low enough to smear everything gold. People were fishing off the edges, families wandering around, joggers passing through without slowing down. It felt open, safe. I picked it because it felt impossible for anything bad to happen there. He was already leaning against the railing when I arrived, watching the water like it was doing something interesting. When he turned and smiled, it looked practiced, like he'd rehearsed it in his head a few times. We walked side by side down the pier, talking about the weather, the smell of salt, the way the boards creaked underfoot. That's when he said it. He told me I reminded him of someone. I've heard that before, so I didn't react much. I asked in a casual way who. He hesitated, eyes still on the water, and said someone from a while ago. His tone shifted, heavier, like the night had just changed lanes. Then he apologized. Not for bringing it up. Not for making things awkward. He apologized for what happened to her. My stomach dropped. I asked what happened, expecting something vague, like they broke up or lost touch. He shook his head slowly and said it wasn't like that. He said things didn't end cleanly, said he still felt bad about it. The way he said it made it sound settled, like the ending had already been written and accepted. I felt the tightness in my chest and laughed it off, saying that sounded intense for a first date. He smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed serious. He said he didn't mean to make things heavy. Said it just slipped out when he noticed how similar we were. I asked what he meant by similar. He listed things. The way I stood with my weight on one foot. The way I looked at the water instead of at him when I talked. The way I tucked my hands into my sleeves when it got windy. Each detail landed like a small tap to the ribs. None of it was obvious stuff. It was the kind of things you only notice if you're paying close attention. I joked that maybe he just had a type. He didn't laugh. We kept walking, but the pier felt longer now. The noise of people around us faded into the background. I noticed he walked half a step behind me instead of beside me, like he was lining something up. Every time I slowed to look at something, he slowed too. Every time I sped up, he adjusted instantly. He started telling me about the girl. Not her name. Never her name. Just fragments. How she liked water. How she hated loud places. How she trusted people too easily. He said it like he was describing weather patterns, not a person. I asked where she was now. He paused, long enough that I could hear my own breathing. Then he said she wasn't around anymore. Said it was complicated. Said people always thought they knew how things ended, but they rarely did. We stopped near the end of the pier where the boards were darker and wetter. The crowd thinned out there. He leaned against the railing again and looked out at the water. I stayed a step back, suddenly aware of the distance between us. He apologized again, said he hoped she hadn't suffered, said he wished he'd done things differently. His voice stayed calm, but his hands were clenched tight on the railing. I asked if something bad had happened to her. He nodded once. That was it. No explanation, no details, just that. I told him I was sorry because that felt like the expected response, but the words tasted wrong in my mouth. Sorry for who? Sorry for what? Sorry because I was standing here now, filling a shape that didn't belong to me. He turned to look at me then, really look, and his expression softened in a way that made my skin crawl. He said it in a lot that I understood. Said the last girl hadn't understood until it was too late. Too late for what? I glanced back toward the main part of the pier. It felt farther away than before. The sounds of laughter and footsteps felt muted, like someone had turned the volume down just enough to make things private. I said I needed to head back soon. He nodded, but there was disappointment there, sharp and immediate. He said he hoped I wouldn't disappear like she did. Said sudden endings made things harder to process. I told him I wasn't disappearing, just leaving. He smiled faintly and said that was what she'd said too. My heart started pounding. I took a step back without thinking. The wood creaked under my foot, loud in the quiet space. He noticed. His eyes flicked down, then back up to my face. He said he didn't mean to project. Said grief did that to people. Said sometimes you saw echoes where there weren't any. He apologized again, softer this time, like he was trying to smooth things over. But then he asked if I ever thought about how easily someone could just stop existing in a crowded place. I stared at him, not sure I'd heard right. He clarified, saying people walked away from their old lives all the time. Changed names, moved cities, became stories instead of people. He said it happened more than anyone liked to admit. I said I didn't like thinking about that. He nodded like that made sense, said she hadn't liked thinking about it either. I started walking back toward the entrance of the pier. He followed, matching my pace exactly. The boards thumped under our steps in sync. I felt trapped by the rhythm of it, like if I broke stride, something would snap. As we walked, he kept talking about regret, about guilt, about how apologies didn't really fix anything but sometimes helped you sleep. He said he'd been carrying that apology for a long time, said it felt strange finally saying it out loud again. Again. I asked who he'd said it to before. He looked confused for a second, then said he thought I knew. Said he'd said it to her, of course. Said she just hadn't been in a position to hear it properly. My mouth went dry. We were halfway back now, more people around, kids running past, someone ringing the bell on a bike, normal life bleeding back in. He didn't seem to notice any of it. He asked if I believed apologies mattered. I said sometimes. He nodded thoughtfully and said timing mattered more. Said an apology given at the wrong moment could make things worse. We reached the start of the pier. Solid ground, street noise, cars passing. I stopped walking. I told him I was done with the date. He froze for just a second, like the word didn't register. Then his face tightened. He asked if he'd said something wrong. I didn't answer. I just stepped back, creating space. He sighed and said he understood. Said he probably pushed too much. Said he hoped he hadn't scared me. The word scared hung there, heavy and unacknowledged. He apologized one last time, not for me. Not for the night. For her. That was the moment I knew I needed to leave immediately. I turned and walked away without looking back. My heart was hammering, but every step felt more real the farther I got. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I locked the doors and sat there breathing hard, replaying everything. Later that night, he messaged me. He said he was sorry the date ended abruptly. Said he hadn't meant to bring old ghosts into something new. Said I really did remind him of her, and he hoped that wasn't unfair. I blocked him without replying. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched local news, missing persons, accidents, anything. I didn't have a name, so I didn't expect to find anything. But a short article caught my eye. A woman reported missing near the pier months earlier. Loved the water. Last seen on an evening walk. The photo made my stomach drop. The resemblance wasn't exact, but it was close enough. I don't go to that pier anymore. I don't like places where people can vanish into crowds and leave behind nothing but apologies. And when someone tells me I remind them of someone else now, I don't stick around long enough to find out why. The question didn't land like a joke. It landed like a test I didn't know I was taking. I remember the exact second it happened because my body reacted before my brain could catch up, like someone flicked the switch behind my ribs. 1 minute I was relaxed, leaning back in my chair, thinking this was finally just a normal first date. The next I was sitting perfectly still, heart thudding, trying to understand why the air suddenly felt thinner. We met at a rooftop cafe above a parking garage, the kind of place people like because it felt hidden without being secret. String lights zigzagged overhead, plants and chipped pots lined the edges, and the city stretched out below us like a quiet hum. I picked it because it felt open, high up, visible, nothing lurking in corners. She was already there, sitting near the railing with her drink untouched. When she smiled, it felt easy. Real. She had that calm energy that made you feel like you didn't have to perform. We talked about dumb stuff at first. The view. Bad playlists. How the wind up there always messed with drinks. She said she liked honesty early on. Said it saved time. I agreed, because that sounded healthy and mature and exactly what people said when they wanted things to feel grounded. We ordered food. The server left. The lights flickered softly as the sun dipped lower. Everything felt normal enough that I let my guard down without realizing it. She leaned in a little, resting her elbows on the table. Her voice dropped just enough to feel private without being secretive. She said she had a question, but only if I was comfortable answering honestly. I said sure. She smiled, eyes locked on mine, and asked where I'd want to be found if I disappeared. My stomach dropped. For half a second, I thought I misheard her. Like maybe she said something else and my brain filled in the wrong words. I asked her to repeat it. She didn't hesitate. Didn't soften it. Just asked again, calmly like she was asking about favorite places or childhood memories. I laughed because that's what people do when they don't know how else to respond. The laugh came out wrong. Too sharp. She noticed immediately and smiled wider, like she'd expected that reaction. She said she was serious, said she liked honest answers. I asked why she would even think about that. She shrugged and said people avoided the idea of disappearing, but it happened all the time. Said she liked knowing how people thought about it. Said it told you what mattered to them. I tried to turn it into a joke, saying I hadn't really planned my disappearance. She leaned back slightly, studying me, then said most people hadn't. Said that didn't mean they wouldn't. The rooftop suddenly felt less open. The railing felt closer. The city below felt farther away, like it couldn't hear us. I gave a vague answer. Said somewhere peaceful. Somewhere outdoors. I kept it light. She nodded like she was filing it away. Then she asked why that place. What made it peaceful? Who would look for me there? That's when it started to feel wrong. She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was asking for details, specifics, landmarks, access. Her eyes stayed focused, unblinking, like she didn't want to miss anything. I asked her the same question back, hoping to flip the energy. She smiled and said she'd already thought about it. Said she preferred places people didn't check right away. Said being found too quickly complicated things. Complicated what? I noticed then that she hadn't touched her food. It sat untouched between us, cooling. She didn't seem hungry. She seemed engaged in something else entirely. She asked if I believed people were easier to understand once they were gone. Said stories got simpler when someone wasn't around to correct them. Said honesty mattered most at the end. I felt cold despite the warm night air. I wrapped my hands around my glass and realized my fingers were shaking. She noticed. Of course she did. She said I didn't have to answer if it made me uncomfortable. Said discomfort was just another form of honesty. Said sometimes the most truthful answers were the ones people tried to avoid. I glanced around the rooftop. A few other tables were occupied, but everyone was wrapped in their own conversations. Laughter drifted up from below. Nobody was paying attention to us. She leaned in closer. Not touching, just close enough that I could smell her perfume, something faint and clean. She said hypotheticals were safe. Said imagining something didn't make it real. Said talking about disappearance didn't mean anyone wanted it to happen. Then she smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and said, but it helped be prepared. I pushed my chair back slightly. She noticed the movement immediately. Her gaze dropped to the space between us, then back to my face. She asked if I was thinking about leaving. I said maybe. She nodded like that was reasonable. Said sudden exits made conversations feel unfinished. Said unfinished things lingered. She asked if anyone would notice if I disappeared tonight. The question hit harder than the first one. My chest tightened and my heart started racing. I said yes. Said people knew where I was. Said I always checked in. She frowned, just a little, like that detail complicated her mental picture. She asked who knew. I kept it vague. She didn't push, but the disappointment was clear. She told me she liked people who didn't vanish without a trace. Said mystery made people search too hard. Said clean narratives were kinder. The words felt wrong, heavy, like they belonged in a different context entirely. I stood up, deciding I didn't care how awkward it looked. The night air hit me harder when I rose, like I'd been underwater and just surfaced. I said I was going to head out. She stayed seated, hands folded, watching me with calm interest. She said she hoped she hadn't scared me. Said she just valued transparency. Said if something ever happened, she'd want people to know where to look. I grabbed my jacket and stepped away from the table. My legs felt steady, but my thoughts raced. I didn't look back until I reached the stairs down from the rooftop. She was still there, already picking at her food now, like the conversation had ended cleanly for her. I took the stairs two at a time. The parking garage smelled like oil and concrete. My footsteps echoed too loud. When I reached my car, I locked the doors immediately and sat there breathing hard, hands clenched around the steering wheel. Later that night, after I calmed down, my phone buzzed. A message from her. She said she hoped I got home safe. Said she enjoyed talking with me. Said she admired my honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. Then she added one more thing. She said if I ever changed my mind about the question, she'd be curious to hear the answer. I blocked her without replying. A few days later, I was scrolling through local posts and saw something that made my stomach drop. A discussion thread about missing people in the city. Someone mentioned a pattern. Rooftop dates. Philosophical questions. People who asked about disappearance early on. The post ended with a comment that stuck with me. It said sometimes the scariest people weren't the ones who threatened you. Sometimes they were the ones who planned for your absence like it was already a possibility. I don't go to rooftops anymore. I don't entertain hypotheticals about vanishing. And when someone says they like honesty, I make sure they mean about themselves, not about how easily I could be erased. I didn't stand up because I was scared at first. I stood up because I felt done. That heavy, flat feeling you get when a night runs out of momentum and your body decides before your head does. I remember thinking I'd just leave, text a friend, and forget the whole thing by morning. It felt clean, simple. I didn't know I was stepping into the exact moment he'd been waiting for. We met at a quiet train station cafe that stayed open late for people passing through. Not commuters, not tourists, just the in-between crowd. Suitcases lined the walls, departure boards flickered overhead, and everything smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long. I picked it because it felt temporary. Nobody lingered. Nobody settled in. He was already seated when I arrived, back straight, hands folded on the table like he'd been there a while. He smiled when he saw me, but it wasn't warm or cold. It was neutral, controlled, like a default setting. The date itself wasn't bad. That's the annoying part. It wasn't obviously wrong. We talked about random stuff, made a few jokes, complained about late nights and long waits. He listened closely, but not in a flattering way. More like he was tracking the conversation, not enjoying it. I noticed early on that he never leaned back, never relaxed. He stayed forward, attentive, like he didn't want to miss a cue. Every time the train board chimed and updated, his eyes flicked up automatically, then back to me. I figured he was anxious or had somewhere to be. About halfway through, I started to feel restless. Not uncomfortable exactly, just finished. The kind of feeling where staying feels like more effort than leaving. I checked the time and realized I'd been there longer than I thought. I told him I was probably going to head out soon. He nodded, just once, like that was expected. The conversation slowed after that. Not awkward silence, but something close. He asked fewer questions, watched more. I noticed his foot tapping lightly against the floor, matching the rhythm of the station announcements. When a group of people stood up from a nearby table, He tracked them until they disappeared toward the platforms. Something about that made my chest tighten. I gathered my bag and stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the tile. The sound echoed more than it should have in the open space. A few people glanced over, then went back to their phones. He stayed seated. He looked up at me with that same calm expression and said this part was usually the hardest. Not emotional hardest. Not goodbyes or awkward hardest. Just hardest. Like a step in a process. My stomach dropped. I asked what he meant, trying to keep my voice light, but my body was already tense. He smiled slightly like I had asked a predictable question. He said people underestimated how difficult it was to leave once things were set in motion. He said hesitation happened here more than anywhere else. I laughed nervously and said I didn't think it was that deep. I took a step back from the table, creating space. He noticed immediately. He said I didn't need to rush. Said sudden exits made people sloppy. Said this moment deserved a little care. The word deserved sat wrong in my head. I shifted my bag on my shoulder and glanced toward the exit. The sliding doors were only a few yards away. Beyond them, night air and noise and movement. It felt farther than it looked. He finally stood up then. Not fast, not aggressive, just smooth and deliberate. He didn't block my path, but he positioned himself slightly closer to it than before. Enough to be noticed, enough to make me adjust my angle. He said most people thought standing up was the end. Said that wasn't true. Said endings took effort. Said if you rushed them, things got messy later. That word again. I told him I really did need to go. My heart was pounding now loud in my ears. He nodded, but his eyes stayed sharp. He asked if I'd ever noticed how many people froze right where I was standing. Said the body hesitated even when the mind was sure. I took another step back. He mirrored it without thinking. The station noise faded into the background. All I could hear was my breathing and the distant hum of a train pulling in somewhere underground. I felt suddenly very aware of my weight, my balance, the space behind me. He said he wasn't trying to stop me. Said he just liked understanding how people left. Said the hardest part was deciding whether someone really meant it. Meant what? I tightened my grip on my backstrap. My hands were slick with sweat. I told him I meant it. That I was leaving. He smiled again. Calm. Reassuring. Like he'd heard that exact phrasing before. He said that was good. Said clarity helped. Said sometimes people wavered and that made things take longer. Take longer than what? I noticed then that the table behind him was empty, even though the cafe was busy. The chairs were pushed in neatly, like no one had sat there in a while. He shifted slightly, and for a second I could see the reflection of the departure board in the window behind him. The times blurred together, destinations flickering too fast to read. I stepped sideways, trying to go around him. He moved with me, not blocking, just adjusting, staying in my line of travel like it was accidental. He said this was the moment most people panicked. Said panic made mistakes. Said he preferred calm exits. I felt the surge of anger cut through the fear. I told him to move. He looked genuinely surprised by that. His eyebrows lifted, his smile fading just a bit. He said there was no need for that. Said we were doing fine. Said this would pass if I just slowed down. I didn't slow down. I ducked past him, shoulder brushing his arm. The contact was brief, but it felt electric. His body tensed instantly, like he hadn't expected me to commit to the movement. I made it 2 steps for the door before he spoke again, quieter this time. He said running made people remember you. Said walking out calmly made things easier to forget. That sentence almost stopped me. Almost. The door slid open with a soft hiss and cold air rushed in. It felt like breaking the surface of water. I stepped outside, heart hammering, legs shaking, and kept walking. I didn't look back until I reached the far end of the platform. He was still inside, standing where I left him, watching through the glass. He didn't follow. He didn't wave. He just stood there, hands at his sides, expression thoughtful, like he was reviewing something that hadn't gone quite right. I walked until the station lights faded behind me. My phone buzzed with a notification, and I flinched hard enough to stop mid-step. It was just a friend sending a meme. I almost laughed from the release. When I got home, I locked the door and sat on the floor for a long time, listening to my own breathing slow down. My live space felt smaller than usual, like the walls had leaned in a bit while I was gone. Later that night, a message came through from him. He said he hoped I got home safe. Said he appreciated that I stayed calm. Said most people didn't make it through that part without getting emotional. That part. I blocked him and deleted the thread. His profile disappeared like it had never existed. A week later, I passed through that same station during the day. Sunlight streamed through the windows, the cafe buzzed with noise, everything looked harmless. I stood near the same table without meaning to and felt my chest tighten. I thought about how close I came to hesitating, how easy it would have been to sit back down just to avoid awkwardness, how ready he was for that choice. Now, whenever I stand up to leave anywhere, I pay attention to how people react, not what they say, how their body adjusts, how quickly they move. Because sometimes the hardest part isn't leaving. It's realizing someone was waiting for you to try.